flatbed hover truck. Half a dozen officers holding long-barreled laser guns escorted us toward a flatbed hover truck. The vehicle had a Savage cage mounted on the tray, 20 feet long by 10 wide, the bars a white, shiny metal. The truck was more fitted to carry fierce criminals, not people, not a young half-Mexican girl from Calexico and her blonde-haired boyfriend. The officer leading us wore a tailored blue shirt, a face just as meticulous. I asked him, "Are you sure you're taking us to Sveta's chief of police and not the jail?" "You asked for our town's top brass," he said. Although he didn't feel trustworthy, we had no other leads or choices but to ask for the local police to help us find Katie. He took us to the back of the truck and motioned for us to climb aboard. Tanton eyed him dubiously. "Why are we traveling in a vehicle that is obviously meant for carting criminals?" He put his arm around me. "Avita and I are only trying to find our young friend, Katie." "Precaution," the officer said. "We can't be too careful of spies from their camp." "Spies?" I said. "We too have a conflict with the rebels." He left us and climbed into the driver's seat. A dark-eyed woman joined him. The remaining 4 crowded into the back of the truck with us. The white flat bench seat appeared hard but eased into soft cushions upon striking my backside. It seemed our hope of being a family, just Tanton, Katie and me, was a world away, at least hidden up in the woodland with the rebels. So much was yet required to rescue our friend. We knew nothing of the people who took her, except they were ferocious and rebellious to the order on this new establishing planet of Cerulean. And there was no way of knowing what they would truly want with Katie. Joanna, before she died defending me, suggested they'd train her to live like them, a savage. My heart beat as intensely as it had on the ship, Welcome, as it was burning to cinders in the cosmos, and when we raced to rescue Katie from Pecoro. The blue-eyed girl had captured my heart as if she were from my own blood, and it would break Tanton and I in a way indescribable if we failed to rescue her and see her blonde bouncy locks. The afternoon sun began to wane, its magnificence reduced by the clouds as it winked in between broken patches. The hover truck became lost in the noises of the streets of Sveta, the vehicle plunging deep into the new colony. A throng of people were all enclosed by a maze of brilliant stone buildings that weaved between streets that formed clusters of color. Local gentlemen were rushing about their business, the ladies of the town were wearing outfits unimaginable in styles, eyeing one another jealously. Frustrated tradesmen were hard at work erecting new buildings stone by stone with their control copters carrying materials, and kids dashed about through the streets, seemingly without direction and bellowing competitive noises. Hover vehicles weaved through the black stone streets, some clumsy driver bumping us and making our truck wobble on its jets. Buskers were working the streets performing tricks, playing guitars, singing loudly, their voices echoing through the streets as passers-by would click change onto their money cards. Our truck turned into a narrow street that didn't register the beauty of the others. The bordering buildings' walls were blank other than some unevenly spaced top windows, and some large, square trash collector bins hugged the walls, one brimmed with rubbish as if foam spilling over a glass of beer. The street T intersected at a white brick building, and after the driver swerved right, he pulled over beside a green garage door. Tanton and I eyed each other, my eyes trying to ask him, is this some den where they sell people on the black market? The garage door slid up and the truck bumped its way inside, came to a wobbly halt, and we all climbed out. The building was a vast open space the size of a basketball court. All the walls were white, the floor a cheap and cracked gray stone. A line of windows revealed the distant hills and woods. A crooked line of tables with computers sat to the left, forming a makeshift office. Taking our full attention were 5 men dressed in blue. They had long-barreled laser guns aimed at targets of blank-faced men that stood at the end of the building. Our truck driver joined us and I asked him, what are they doing? He eyed them with little confidence. Practicing. Tanton and I shared a soft gaze that reflected the same perplexing question, who do they need to shoot? Time to meet Galleon Washington, our escort said, and he marched us past the people lining up shots, to a man who appeared to be instructing them. He had a wave of light brown hair, trimmed in gray at the temples. His eyes were also gray but not plain and ordinary, rather they possessed a dreamy depth, as if clouds concealing secrets. A collared white shirt was tailored to his body, revealing a brawny chest and core. "If you miss your targets," the man spoke to them in a voice that sounded like an angry sensei, "the rebels will have you killed before you can blink. Now fire." A procession of laser guns powered away like an offbeat drum symphony, and a cluster of blue streaks lit up the air, missed the human targets and struck the wall, adding more black marks where the wall was not already scorched. Our escort took the attention of Mr. Washington. "Chief, these people have just arrived from planet Earth, and now they want to infiltrate the rebels and rescue a young girl." It seemed we had found the right man. He forgot his unskilled officers and trained his gray eyes on us. He held his hands behind his back and slowly paced forward, evaluating. "Name?" Galleon Washington said. "Evita Sanchez," I said. "Tanton." I shot a look to Tanton, curious why he never said his last name, and I wanted to know it, but now wasn't the time for asking. Galleon shook his head. "The name of the girl you seek." "Katie," I said. Galleon paused for a short while, scratching his chin. "It's impossible for you to retrieve her. Go home." And he turned and walked away. Our search for Katie threatened to end quickly. Even receiving help required a fight. I took a quick step forward and took his arm. He turned as quickly as the surrounding officers took to raise laser guns to my head and torso. No need to say I released his arm almost as fast and stepped back. But despite being threatened and told we had no chance, Tanton and I would not be persuaded. "She is like a child to us," I said. "We will do anything." Tanton joined me. "She has the cutest smile, sir." "You won't have a smile," Galleon said to him and stepped up to his face. "You will be dead. The rebels will not let you enter their realm." "Couldn't we talk to them?" I said. "Negotiate." "We only want our friend back." "They do not negotiate," Galleon said. The small brigade was readying themselves for another shot at the targets. They were preparing for an onslaught. It seemed a little strange given the rebels weren't attacking. "Why do you want to go to war with them?" Galleon breathed heavily and looked me dead in the eye, as if the question made him want to shoot me. "Because now they have murdered Picoro. They are all that remain who hold the understanding of how to take control of Oliver Monet's empire." I scratched my ankle with my boot, a little uneasy of him believing the rebels killed Picoro and not me. But Picoro tried to kill Tanton and I, so I let it slide. "What happens if the rebels succeed?" I said. Galleon gazed out the far windows, toward the hills and valleys where the rebels lived. "They will control the power to Stygian and Sveta. We will all be at their command, slaves like your young friend. It would be a horrible outcome for the world to be controlled by a wild few, but the thought of what would happen to us all was overtaken by what was currently happening to Katie. Was she cooking for the people up there? Scrubbing the floors of some shack where 3 or 4 shady men lived? Or being trained to hate the masses? My body chilled all over. "We are venturing to the hills," I said. "You will have to shoot a laser through my back to stop me." Galleon didn't speak for a while, but it was obvious he was pondering a few different outcomes of his next decision. "Truly a chief." "Very well," he eventually said, and then motioned toward the men with the laser guns. "I will escort you with my best men. I know where they hold captives, recruits for their schemes." "What do you get out of this?" Tanton said, and now he was eyeing the chief, forever suspicious. "I'll learn how they react to infiltration," Galleon said. "And when you fail, and fail you shall, I will be better equipped for my war." The chief seemed like a wise man, yet also harsh and lacking emotion, and he also seemed certain that if we entered the woods our death would be imminent. It made me take a huge breath, but I wasn't going to back down, nor was Tanton. "How many of your men will we take?" I said. Galleon motioned to the lineup. 10 of these fine officers." And then Galleon whipped out a laser gun from his holster and leveled his arm straight out like an arrow, and pee-pow pow pow, he fired a succession of 4 shots. The streaks of blue zipped through the air and struck the target around the mouth, making a crooked smile that was smoking with blue flame, a smile with which he turned and offered himself. Tanton didn't appear too impressed nor convinced and said, "Wouldn't it be more prudent for us to just sneak in?" Galleon shook his head. "I need protection if they catch us." It seemed risky trooping in with a small brigade, but there appeared no other way. And they were such lousy shots. "Do we get lasers?" I said. "Our protection." Galleon sighed as if he were dealing with mischievous adolescents. From his belt, he withdrew what looked like a black cupboard handle and handed it to me. "You two will only take a laser shield." I held the black handle and squeezed a trigger. It made a wee-oo sound and outspread a half-egg-shaped clear dome. It wasn't the best, but it'd have to do. "I'm not returning without her." Galleon shrugged.
"Maybe you won't return."
Rock. The agreement had been made, and so we would venture into the woods and the mountains to rescue Katie from the clutches of evil. Our weapons merely laser-proof shields, the half-egg-shaped domes that spread out upon pressing its small black handle. The chief treated us courteously in his old abandoned warehouse, and he escorted us around the village and showed us their technology and construction projects, and we had a healthy dinner of lobster and vegetables at a petite village restaurant called The Last Tree. A small hotel that faced the mountains was our place of sleep, but despite the gorgeous view it had me tossing and turning on dreadful dreams. In the morning Galleon had us dressed just like him, in shirts and pants of a green darker than the forest. His brigade of 10, all wearing similar greens, joined us in the hover truck as we drove silently toward the woodlands. The open fields gave way to boulders the size of houses, yielding to valleys that merged into the murky shadows of the thick woods. What people waited for us amongst the trees? The truck halted at a pure blue river pass that climbed onto rock. Tanton was breathing intently. The troops exited our vehicle until the forest was dotted with officers. I stepped from the truck, readied my shield, and tried to think of nothing but Katie's smile. The river trickled as we crossed it, slipping effortlessly between the stones and boulders jutting from the pebbly riverbed. Pink-stripped fish, like trout, were hovering behind scattered boulders, easing in the gentle current and waiting for a passing smaller fish or perhaps a grasshopper to strike the water. It seemed a peaceful world down there, unless you were the grasshopper. The riverbank soon climbed the rocky embankment, and we all had to crawl our way up, grabbing hold of stray twisted tree roots for balance. The ground leveled out and eased into the thickening forest, where the sun was impaired by the lushness of the branches and leaves, the leaves making a subtle swish as they blew in the wind. The air was so pure and so clean, it felt as though it was cleansing my lungs, and as the native birds danced high in the branches and sung beautiful songs, it all gave me a glimmer of the peaceful life Tanton had dreamed of, one I hoped remained a possibility. We traveled on, drinking our water and eating our supply of beans. It appears some things never change. As night fell and my legs tired, our tranquil hike was broken, as Galleon raised a hand to halt our march. A thicket of red-flowered bushes offered us cover, and Galleon pointed forward.
"Katie is being held in that small cabin."
Ahead, the trees broke open into a clearing, where a stone cabin edged the forest. In the dark, it was difficult to make out, but it appeared as though other buildings were clustered together. The light of the stars and half-moon shone upon the slate roofs, and the gentle shine gave the feeling the houses were sleeping. Hopefully the people inside were too. "Do we raid it?" Tanton said. Galleon shook his head.
"Only Avita will go."
"We need stealth. If Katie sees others, she could scream. We don't want to alert anyone. So I just go knock on the door." I said. "You can go through the rear window." Galleon handed me a small tool, a black, clumpy object that looked like a longish potato with a black disc at the end. "This will melt the glass." It reminded me of my difficult attempts of cutting the glass to pinch the source rod. Hopefully it wasn't made in Calexico. Tanton looked into my eyes. "Call if you get into trouble, and I'll come running." I left our small crew and crept through the woods toward the back of the house. A line of thick oaks parted, leaving only a bush that spread out like a large cauliflower that welcomed me out into the open. Only 20 paces under the stars to the window. It appeared no one was around, so I skulked forward. It suddenly felt so dangerous out in the open, as if this was a trap. At the window, a pointy-beaked white chicken with brown spotted feathers pestered my feet. It started clucking, pecking at my shoes. "Shish," I told it and shooed it away with my boot. It was near pure darkness inside the cottage. I pressed the potato-like heat gun to the glass, holding it with my left hand and noticing my little finger missing from the knuckle. Laser fire had torn it off, and it made me wonder if breaking into this house would see more body parts damaged. I clicked on the heat gun and it vibrated, a slight tremble. "Do not break." But pretty soon, the glass shone a dull red glow, and then it began to melt around the edges like icing upon a cake, and the glass just fell off the window frame. I grabbed it before it struck the ground and leaned the glass against the stone wall. Inside was a cozy room that had a dining area and lounge, and 2 rooms that trailed to the side, led by open archways. No one was there. No one that could be seen, at least. Holding the heat gun for a weapon, I placed my hands on the timber rail and slipped my boot over, dragging my other leg behind and clumsily navigating my way through the window. I landed gently on the floorboards, barely making a noise that a finch would create landing on a tree. An exit door sat at the end of the small room. Hopefully, no one would be entering. Whoever lived here sure enjoyed their pottery, as fine porcelain vases lined the shelves. But it was not the time for inspecting artifacts. Time for Katie. I crept to the nearest archway, and it opened to a small bedroom with a single old-time wooden bed. Subtle light drifted through the window and caressed the white sheets and blanket. A lump was under them, and at the lump's top was a crop of blonde curls hiding a cute little face. Katie's golden hair warmed my heart like a sunrise on a crisp morning. To wake her without startling the sleeping beauty, I gently blew on her cheeks and eyelids. She blinked a few times, then opened her eyes. "It's me, Katie," I whispered. "We're leaving. Don't even peep." I helped her out of bed and held her hand as we walked out the archway. In the doorway stood a ghostly, unmoving figure. It felt like those electric eels shocked my heart. A woman stood in a black gown, as if bed attire. Her dark brown hair hung loosely like a tangle of weeds, shrouding a pair of deep brown eyes that had the distinct curve of those heralded from the Japanese. She glared on, a mouth as unmoved as stone. Tanton's promise of he'd come running if I screamed ran through my head. But so far only this one woman had spotted me, and a loud burst from the depths of my lungs would likely wake this whole village of rebels. It would be best to deal with the woman myself. Somehow. I stood, thinking. "You're not taking the child," she said, her tone flat as the floor. "You're one of those who took her," I said, and braced my hand before Katie, nudging her behind. I held out the heat gun and clicked it on. The end disc glowed as red as molten lava. "Let us leave in peace," I said, "or this will melt your face onto your shoulders." She slowly moved one of her hands that hung by her side, and it revealed she was holding a small black object. A shield? Suddenly a white beam burst from the handle with a fast shing sound, appearing like a sword of white light. Although it appeared lethal, it mustn't stop me from saving Katie. After all, it could just be a nightlight. "Stay by the window," I said to Katie, then skulked forward with the heat gun, the disc glowing red. The woman leapt forward and swung the white beam of light. The light swished right by me and struck the heat gun in my hand. The top half of the gun flew toward a shelf and smacked against a vase. The woman quickly stepped aside and stopped it wobbling, securing it on the shelf. The remaining half of the heat gun remained in my hand. "So your weapon beats mine," I said, then used the woman's distracted state over the vase to quickly retreat to Katie. The woman faced us again. It seemed the only option was to tuck tail and climb out the window. But judging by my slowness of getting myself inside, the sluggish climb outside with Katie would see this speedy woman severing my back in two by the time we hugged the sill. The only way out was past her, through the open doorway. But how? She had a weapon that could sever my arm with a single swipe. The woman stepped forward, placing a careful step on the floorboards. "Don't fight," Katie said. "I didn't start it," I said. The woman stepped closer. Soon she would dash forward and slash me into sushi. It was impossible to pass her. The only viable option was to turn and throw Katie out the window, and call for Tanton to come rescue her, and then have the woman cut me down. Katie's big blue eyes were so innocent. At least she was someone worth dying for. But that didn't mean giving up. There had to be a way to outsmart the woman. Along the wall was a feasible solution. I scanned the vases and looked for the nicest one. A pink one with red flower overlays looked exquisite, glimmering brilliantly in the light of the window. I snatched it up, and the woman's curved eyes expanded. I didn't hurl the vase at the woman, instead I gently tossed it through the air in a twirling rainbow-like arc. It looped away toward the wall, and the woman watched it with alert eyes, as if a baby were falling from a tree. She dropped the white blade and stepped toward the ornament. I picked up Katie in both arms and ran right past her, leaving the woman to catch the vase. I dashed outside and skidded a hard right, running along the grass. What followed was a mad, jerking run while holding Katie in my arms. Her head bobbed away like a floating bottle in a rough sea. "Don't even peep," I repeated to her, and we hit the cover of the forest and ran into the shadows. Soon Tanton stepped from a thick oak and grabbed me. After whirling me around to bring Katie and myself to a safe halt, he said, "We gotta go." A woman burst from the house and ran to the village. I had outsmarted the woman, and given her venomous expressions, her rage would be fully dialed. Galleon led us away, all of our crew running in the dark of the forest. Trees flashed by as we scurried along, breathing heavily and not talking, only following the lead of the chief of police. In time our run took its toll on our lungs and it merged into a fast walk, but we kept moving while gathering our breaths. "They've been nice to me," Katie said. "It's how they slowly turn captives into rebels," Galleon said. "You would have never been allowed to leave." I gave Katie's hand a comforting squeeze. "It's how the mob first was with me." Not long into our walk, Galleon once again stopped in his tracks and raised a hand. We all came to a hushed stance, huddled around like spooked sheep. Galleon stood staring into the forest where there was a small clearing, to what appeared would make a good campsite. Glitters of the stars and moon were breaking through the leaves, their temperate light sleeping over the grass and patches of earth. Galleon remained staring. I crept up beside him and whispered, "Is it the rebels?" He simply squeezed his raised hand into a fist. Every one of his men looked on into the woods, a handful appearing ready, most looking confused, and only one watching intensely. Galleon slowly unhooked his long-barreled laser gun from off his shoulder. My senses immediately heightened, and I stepped back beside Tanton and Katie. We each clutched our shield handles. A crackling sound rippled from ahead, beyond some lush bushes. Tanton and I opened our shields and stood shoulder to shoulder, our shields guarding each other and Katie behind us. The men all took arms and aimed their laser guns toward the distant shrubbery, all of them with their eyes lining the gun sights. The crackling increased, crisper and clearer. Whatever army was approaching, it was not stopping. My thoughts rushed to Katie, believing these brutal people will kill her if they take her now, just to punish me. Ahead through the forest, the bushes rustled, then slowly parted. A bear broke through the shrub, its luscious fur as black as night. The beast stopped and stared at us. Its forehead was high and rose steeply, appearing like its massive skull held an intelligent brain. It snorted, shifted its nose around, smelling our scents. Then, after swaying on its thick legs, it meandered off toward our right, past a cluster of boulders and disappearing amongst the woods. All of us breathed a chorus of sighs, and the men lowered their weapons. "I'm glad you're alert," I told Galleon. He winked and snapped his laser back upon his shoulder. A melodious war cry burst from behind us, and a group of men rushed forth. It appeared to be a small army. 2 men burst from a tree and ran at us. Galleon shot one and then fired at the other, but his laser jammed, so he stepped forward and smacked the butt of his gun into the man's head, dropping him instantly. He then pointed to where the bear exited the scene, the group of rocks. "Hide the child amongst the stones," Galleon said. "I didn't risk the lives of my men to let her die." It was a noble act, and we had no weapons to help, so Tanton reverted his shield into the handle and swept Katie into his arms, and we both took off running, me awkwardly holding my shield behind us. A clashing sound of laser fire exploded through the night, ripping apart the once gentle forest sounds. Men were yelling and screaming as the adrenaline of the moment overtook them, and from both parties the shouts came louder. My principal concern was surviving and saving Katie. This was not my war. The rocks closed in ahead, my vision bumpily focusing on them. Then laser fire struck my shield, and it knocked the shield from my grasp and threw me face first into the grass. "Are you okay?" Tanton asked as he pulled me to my feet, and I replied, "I lost the shield," as we kept running. A stream of blue streaks whisked over our heads, crashing into trees then burning in spot fires. Other shots crashed into the boulders, but we kept sprinting, Tanton holding Katie and me taking his shield to hold behind us. Soon we dove in amongst the cluster of boulders, and I shrank the shield to the handle, and we weaved through the small rock maze, until stopping in about the middle of the huddle. The small boulder maze was cramped. Katie stood between us, clutching at my leg as Tanton and I stared each other in the eye. We didn't speak, but our looks said it all. We may die trying to save Katie. It was such a horrendous feeling, it felt as if the boulders had flattened me. And to make it worse, as we stood catching our breath, the sounds of the battle surrounded us like sonic booms through the woods. Men were screaming in adrenaline-filled hate, other men howling after they had been wounded. Laser fire powered relentlessly, blue lights occasionally flashing above the rocks, illuminating Tanton's hazel eyes. It occurred to me that hiding amongst the stones was not secure. Do we remain hiding with Katie? I wondered. Do we run for it? Dash away while the fighting is thick and heavy and escape unseen? I took Tanton's arm, about to ask the question when the sounds of the fighting eased. A few spasmodic lasers fired away, and it didn't take long until they were few, and then came the silence. Nothing. The rocks, our only company. Katie looked up at me and whispered, "Are they gone?" Her voice as fragile as a dry leaf. After such a clashing, horrific sound of swirling death, all that could be heard was our gentle breathing. "I'm not sure," I whispered. We stood in shock for a short while, surprised that we were alive and unscathed, and it was then I realized my heart was thumping, and I slowed my breathing to steady it. Feeling we were all calm, at least to some degree, I again whispered in Tanton's ear, "If some rebels survived, they will likely keep searching for Katie. Perhaps we should leave." Tanton nodded and then pointed between the gaps of the rocks. "Let's take a gander." All of us together wriggled along through the giant boulders, taking the softest steps, until we rounded a pointy boulder shaped like an arrowhead that jabbed at our ribs, and then found an opening that showed a portion of the forest. A horrific sight. A small army was laid out in the plantation, the woods riddled with spot fires. Both sides had suffered great loss. There were men and women of the rebels and the officers who accompanied us, and it seemed they had all been killed. Nobody was walking around, and perhaps Galleon had been slain also. Such a waste of life. Was it my fault? All these dead people. I had wanted to come out here. My guilt eased somewhat as I realized they were preparing for war, regardless. "It seems we can leave," I said quietly. "If any survived, they have fled." We stepped out from the stones. From behind the boulders, footsteps crept along the woods. Tanton and I took Katie and carefully and swiftly snuck back within the shelter of the rocks. Tanton's wide-eyed expression seemed to say the killing is not over. The steps came closer, and then they were joined by whispers. They couldn't be understood, but the tone was serious. Another silence fell, and the only sound was of cicadas clicking at a distance. If only we were high on a tree with them. The steps then sounded as if they were at the entryway of the stones, where we maneuvered in. If they didn't know we were in here, they thought at least somebody could be. Katie gripped my hand. My adrenaline increased and I looked into the maze of stone. 3 pathways lay before us, but which one led out? Did any? Maybe one trail led around to the approaching rebels. Maybe all the trails led to a dead end, that would lead us to our dead end. Steps came closer, trailing through the stones. A path had to be chosen. I nodded to Tanton, and led him and Katie into the middle path of the 3. After a sharp turn, an enormous boulder blocked the vision of the trail. Someone could be hiding behind it. Regardless, we squeezed around the rock, scraping our ribs as we snuck through. To our relief, no one was there except more mazing stones. The steps behind us quickened. Had they heard us? A crooked crack led us deeper into the maze, but we were quickly halted as sounds of another set of steps approached from the front. Tanton silently took the shield handle from me and pressed the release trigger, but the pathway was too narrow for the shield to open other than sideways, so he retracted it. We were without protection. I wanted to scream at the shield, "You are more useless than a Calexico cutter." But that would have been suicide. Steps crept closer either side. A jagged fissure large enough to wriggle through had opened up to our left, and so we took that path. Katie fit through snugly, but Tanton and I were nearly scraping the skin off our arms as rocks tore at us, and it took a lot of willpower not to scream out in pain. We made it through, our arms appearing like a rogue alley cat had savaged them. The rocks crept open in width, but the path only led a few paces until it dead-ended save for a small hole. It was a window to the outside, showing a portion of the forest draped in night. However, the opening was barely big enough for Katie. So close to escape. We turned to head back, but the footfalls crunched through the rocks, approaching. There was no way forward, and they were blocking our way of retreat. This was gonna end with us meeting our foes face to face. And we had not a single weapon. Suddenly footsteps came beside the small hole in the rocks. Chief Galleon lowered his head to look through. "Squeeze out," he whispered. "There's a hidden path down the mountain that leads to Sveta." I shook my head. We can't. But it was obvious that Katie could. But could I send her away without me? We had come so far, and it always seemed to happen as soon as we were united, we were forced apart. However, keeping her here would likely see her recaptured. And so the child who had taken my heart had to go. At least this way Tanton and I could have a better chance to flee on our own. I kneeled and whispered to her, "Go with Galleon. Don't argue. He will take you to Sveta, and we will be following." Katie squeezed her lips shut and shook her head. It hurt me like punches to the stomach when I scooped her up and placed her hands in the hole. "It's no discussion," I told her. "We will catch up. Now crawl or you will see Tanton and I caught." Katie's tears streaked her sweaty cheeks. Then she turned and squeezed through the hole, crawling into the arms of Galleon. "Take her now," I said to him. Galleon nodded to a cluster of distant bushes. "The path lies behind the shrubs. I'll see you soon." He turned into the darkness, and Katie was gone. It felt like I swallowed an icy stone, and it sat deep in my stomach. But I assured myself she was heading to safety. Now for us to join her. But how to escape? There was no way forward in this cramped path. Then the narrow trail offered the answer. We could push our arms and legs against it. Above, the stones stretched up and then appeared to flatten out. Stars above seemed to beckon us on. "We gotta climb," I said quietly, and placed my hands and feet either side of the stone and tried to push up. Tanton quickly joined me, and we climbed a few feet, and then the rocks widened a touch and had us nearly at full stretch, arms and legs spread out like starfish. It made the climb awfully slow going, again like slow wriggling starfish. The footfalls of our enemies approached, their breathing whispering through the stones. Then came the grunt of a man who was squeezing through the gap that earlier tore at our skin. His fingers showed, wriggling forward. We would not make it. Tanton held the shield handpiece sideways and pressed the button. The clear shield made the wheeo sound and opened up. Tanton raised it above his head and maneuvered it until it was flat out and jammed it between two rocks, making a platform. The shield was a saving rainbow. "Climb up and out," Tanton said. I ached to kiss him, but that would have to come later. I grabbed the rim of the shield, Tanton taking hold of the other side, and together we pulled ourselves up. My upper body reached over, and then I knelt upon the shield. I held my hand for Tanton, ready to raise him. As we touched fingers, a man in black squeezed from the rocks. He raced over and pulled Tanton down by the legs. The two of them fell in a clatter, and Tanton struck his head against stone. His eyes rolled groggily. "Tanton," I called. Two more men nudged through the gap and each grabbed a hold of Tanton. 3 strong men. But I could take them, couldn't I? I prepared to jump down when Tanton looked up. He was giddy, and a trickle of blood seeped from his blonde hair. He connected eyes with me, as if imploring me to leave. I still considered jumping. I can fight them off. I can. Two began dragging Tantan away, while the original man looked up to me with a hard gaze, curved eyes showing Asian heritage. "You're next," he said. To have a chance of helping Tantan, I had to stay free, and so I had to go up. I leapt up off the shield, securing my boots on either side of the rock. I grasped the shield handle and retracted the shield. The man came for me and I climbed higher. His fingers touched the toe of my boot, and then he wrapped a hand around it. He pulled at my boot, a slip of my heel against the rock, and I would tumble. My foot trembled. A fall now would leave me captured, and no way of helping Tantan. But I possessed a weapon, the shield. I opened the shield, and considered tossing it at his head. No, I may need it later. So I gathered a firm hold of the handle, and held up the shield like an executioner's axe, and then brought an edge down on his fingers, wedging them against rock. His blazing cry of "Airge" rippled through the night. The man fell to the ground, holding a bloody hand. That foe was temporarily down, but Tantan had already been taken. How can I save him? Do I jump down, kick the screaming man in the head, and go in pursuit? No, I'll never catch them. So instead of sending my boot into the man's skull, I jammed my boots into the sides of the rocks and climbed higher, until gathering myself upon the flat surface of the rocks. The man with the wounded hand was still groaning in agony, and it was annoying because he made it harder to hear the sounds of the others carrying Tantan. "Shut up," I called, but he kept howling. Which way did they take Tantan? The maze of boulders bobbled around me like enormous stone elephants, and they were too high to see the heads of the men. A mess of heavy breathing emerged to the left. I took off with the shield in hand, shrinking it back to the handpiece. I skipped over a boulder and onto the next, and the footfalls of the others became evident. They were exiting the small maze. Once they were out, my superior position from above would be gone, and it would be nearly impossible to beat them from the ground, so I had to catch them now. Then what? I didn't know. I leaped to the next boulder. It was smooth and caused me to slip and almost fall into a crack, but a wild waving of my arms had me regaining balance and kept me on track. I ran forward, leaping to another stone, and a sight of the black hair of the men dragging Tantan tipped through the rocks ahead. They only had one more boulder to pass, and they were out of the maze. I have to do something now. Leaping a crevice took me to the last length of boulder. The men carrying Tantan exited the cluster. For a moment my shoulders shrank, for my chances of beating them on the ground were near nil. Then a wild idea leapt into my mind, and I sprinted harder, preparing to try something at once mad and audacious. "This is never gonna work," I told myself as the final boulder ended, and I leaped off toward the men. Mid-flight, I raised the shield and pressed the release trigger. It opened with a slick wee-oo sound. The men looked back to see me flying toward them. They dropped Tantan. One dove to the side to escape my attack, but the other raised his hands to protect his head and felt the full blow of the flat of the shield clobber into him. We both landed with a crash, the man rolling away and the shield falling from my hand and whacking into a rock, smacking the button and reclosing. Tantan lay beside me, dazed. All the turmoil around me seemed to vanish, as the boyish man with messy hair became my priority. I quickly got to my knees and gently held his head. He looked at me with eyes that were far away into another world, just as groggy as the time of our first meeting when I had shot him with the neutralizer disc. "Tantan," I said. "Wake up. Wake up." He drifted there for a moment, his head in my hands, and he felt so fragile, like a newborn baby without control of its head. He wasn't coming back. Not yet. And then he fell into unconsciousness. I remained kneeling over him, gripping his hair, oblivious to the world. Then my senses returned, and this time it wasn't the sounds of a few footsteps, but many. About a dozen people, a mix of men and women, emerged from the dark trees. They closed in around me like a pack of hungry wolves. "Leave Tantan alone," I said. "Leave us." They kept walking forward, closing in until they were close enough to jump on us. Leave us, I said, tears coming to my eyes. Leave us all. My words made little sense as emotion bubbled inside. They stood in silence, watching us, pondering. Out from the maze of rocks emerged the Asian man. He was grunting and holding his hand, now bloody and wounded, and glaring at me with a twisted gaze that screamed, "I am going to kill you." He gathered a hefty stone in his right hand. It was evident that from this close, 3 fingers had been severed off his other hand. He stood a few paces away, Tanton lying unconscious before him. The man's body trembled, and he gripped the stone tighter. "Both of you are with filthy galleon," he said. "What is this madman going to do?" He lunged forward, raising the rock to bring it down on Tanton's head. I quickly rolled over and grabbed the shield handpiece and pressed it. It opened up as the man lunged down with the rock. The edge of the shield struck his neck. The hit was hard, making a slicing sound. He dropped the stone and stood coughing, holding his throat. Blood filtered through his fingers like wine seeping through a torn wineskin. He collapsed. 2 rebels knelt beside him, covering all but his legs. He was groaning, his boots were wriggling, twitching. Then the boots fell still. An eerie silence took the jungle. The rebels paused in action. I had just killed the man. Taken his life. A cool, slick sensation the size of a fingernail touched my neck. I touched the area and felt a small disc. My head swayed as if I were a leaf falling from one of the surrounding trees. I didn't pass out but collapsed beside Tanton, and it felt as if we were aboard a spinning flying saucer. They must have tagged me with some form of neutralizer disc. They picked up my limp body and carried me away, Tanton carried alongside me. Long-handled gardening tool. It was a whirling trip through the dense woods. Not that my captors were walking in wayward directions, but my head was swirling around as if the planet of Cerulean was a top spun on a table. My mind was half present, my desires anyway. Oh, to get up and flee with Tanton and join Katie, but being carried by these rebels I couldn't move. Time reeled on like this for a while, until I was brought into a house in some room and clunked down upon a bed. Again it was a normal bed with a wooden frame. It was not floating like Pecoro's bed, that I flew out of the window. It was then that I passed out. My mind churned with dreams bizarre and vivid. Most of them were horrid and awful, of killings from Dante and his father, Pecoro Ruiz, back in Calexico, and I was forced to mop the blood of all the victims from the floor, just like Pecoro's father had done to his son many years before. Few dreams, however, were sweet. Tanton and Katie and I were fishing in a bright blue lake with old-world fishing rods from the museums, a giant kingfish pulling on my line. The rod bowed like tall sawgrass bent by ocean winds, and Tanton stood in the boat calling, "The fish must be nearly 20 pounds." Soon I awoke into full consciousness, sitting up in the bed with a rushing gasp and my heart racing. It took a few moments to calm myself. The room was the first thing to face my inspections. It appeared to be a bedroom in a small cabin. The floorboards were long, smooth oak planks, the walls rougher, rounded and thicker trunks of the trees. The ceiling was timber and one window let in the sunshine. It appeared to be the same type of house that held Katie. Tanton and I were in their camp, and how I hoped Katie had made it safely to Sveta. I climbed out of bed. An archway led to another room. Was someone in there keeping guard?
"Hello,"
I said. No reply, only a gentle thud from outside. Someone is in the camp. How come they haven't killed me? Are they planning to? Have they killed Tanton? Tanton. I called, but it soon became obvious no one was coming. The archway led into another single room, the same type of lounge and dining room where Katie was held. But it was not the same one. No vases were lining the walls, but rather this one had some paintings of bushland with sweeping hills, and others portraying lively village scenes. Windows on all 3 sides filled the room with sunlight. Through the adjacent archway resided a simple kitchen, an oven, a sink, and some cupboards. A wooden dining table sat to the side with 4 chairs around it. The table edges were well carved, along with engravings on the back of the chairs. A finely weaved blue rug sat opposite on the floor. This is someone's home, I said. But where are they? And why am I here? It seemed answers would not be arriving by standing in the dining room, so it was time to inspect the outside world. The window by the front door offered a view. Outside was a beautiful sight. It was the village for sure, the one where Katie had been. It was situated on a hilltop, cuddled by a cluster of the cabins. Seeing it in the broad daylight was different, enlightening. The sun had risen midway over a knot of lush forest-filled mountains that overlapped and ran along, fading into the distance. They created a valley that swayed with long grass that drank from a narrow winding river, the water as blue as the sky above which had burned away all the clouds. Parts of the river glimmered like polished silver as it flowed over surfaced rocks. How Tanton would love to be fishing along the stream. From outside, clanking sounds disturbed my thoughts. The clank-clank rang out from the left. A lady was driving an old hoe into the earth, a genuine wooden stick with an iron head. Well, I'll be bundled over. Her inky hair that shimmered a deep brown was sprawling over her face. She stood in a square patch of earth that was half-tilled soil and half-sprouting leafy green cabbage and cauliflower. Broccoli sprouted in abundance along with red-ripe tomatoes and bell peppers of greens as bright as polished emeralds, the reds as deep as a true love's kiss. The scene further unfolded. People were walking around, all busy, but all relaxed and beaming as they undertook tasks. A man was wheeling a barrow of chopped wood, another had a sack lugged over his shoulder, both men sharing friendly chatter. A little farther down the valley, a group of women appeared to be picking apples from rows of apple trees, smiling. Children laughed and played amongst them all. It must have been a community of 200. An old-time world. It was completely different from the township of Sveta, and almost made me smile, but then came a rush of anxiety. Where is Tanton? I strode outside my cabin to the warm mid-morning and a bunch of strangers. Where is my friend? I called out. A few offered fleeting, disinterested glances, then returned to their affairs. The lady with the hoe ceased driving it into the earth, and she stood up to gaze at me. Her dark hair still shrouded parts of her face, but it was the woman who had tried to prevent me from rescuing Katie. The one who held that white blade. She stared on like she wanted to drive the hoe through my chest. Finally she looked away, vigorously driving the hoe into the earth. Who are these people? They arrest me into some old-world settlement. I huffed, then called out Tanton. I was about to stride into the heart of the village and go searching, when a tall African-looking man with a shaved head approached. He was handsome with a firm-set chin, and eyes a deep brown, the color of the richest soil. It was the man who had taken the office's weapons after beating them, and had taken Katie from the rooftop of Pecoro's house. Although he didn't appear friendly, he heralded no signs of viciousness or arrogance. He stood before me, with a gentle breeze blowing his black shirt. Are you hungry? He asked. You took Katie. And now where is Tanton? He regarded me for a moment, then pointed to a cabin bordered on all sides by table-topped decks that were shaded by a veranda. The eatery has plenty of tasty food. He was playing some game. Tanton. This is all we will discuss today, he said, then turned and began to walk away, saying as he motioned toward the vibrant little village, and you are free to wander the grounds. I began walking. Maybe I will wander away through the woods. As he strode he called, the bears will eat you. I stopped and looked into the forest, the trees clustered together so thickly it darkened the earth. More bears could be hiding. Damn him. I forgot the forest and any thoughts of escape. Besides, it was impossible, unthinkable to leave without Tanton, and I strode through the village, determined to search every cabin for Tanton. Then my empty stomach growled, somewhat like a bear. I'd find Tanton right after breakfast. The eatery had 3 women and 2 men eating at a wooden table, mouths over bowls of noodles and vegetables, all offering me fleeting and curious glances. Inside, a cook stood with her back turned. She was an older lady in a blue and white frock with once blonde now partly gray hair, whose wide belly suggested she enjoyed her cooking. The succulent smells of freshly roasting vegetables, spices and herbs ballet danced through the air. It felt like a glittering and beautiful spider's web, designed to attract before a kill. Regardless, I enjoyed a sumptuous mix of noodles and vegetables, the best I'd ever had, and some rich, nutty-flavored coffee. The people hadn't killed me, and perhaps Tanton was alive, so it felt prudent to be on at least some of the people's good side, before finding Tanton and escaping, so I decided to show courtesy to the chef. "A breakfast of 1,000 flavors," I said to the lady. She smiled fleetingly, then went back to the pans. It's going to be hard to fool them, I thought, then left the eatery to search for Tanton. My nerves began to drift away like tossed chaff, stolen by the calm wafts of the village. It felt like being dropped into the 11th century, a time not ruled by science. Men, ladies, children, all easing purposefully throughout the small huts and hills, weaving around water wells, planting seeds and caught in friendly chatter, and all of them seemed to ignore me as if I were a mere bird fluttering through the village. They didn't appear to hate me, but they didn't seem to love me, either. I guess that was understandable, considering I had just fought against them. Killed one of them. The only harsh response I received was from the woman tending to the vegetable patch with the hoe, and although she left that chore when the day heated, from beneath the shade of trees and verandas she would often throw hard-eyed stares that seemed to say, "Get out of my village." Perhaps I was a prisoner, allowed to walk the fields. I searched every hut in the hamlet, calling out, "Tanton," but my calls were met by headshakes from the people living in the homes, and the occasional bird that went fluttering away due to my loud pestering voice. The afternoon sun sunk to the tips of the trees that began to stretch shadows across the green village, and despite the peace of the place, my patience began to wane, and I decided it was damn time that someone answered my questions. The woman who gave me the evil glances seemed most likely to offer a response, although it may not be a friendly one. The evening had cooled the day, and she had returned to the hoe, her vegetable garden bathed in shadow. I strode up to her while she kept her back to me, and dug away. "Where is Tanton?" I asked. The woman kept digging. "She gives me rotten stares all day, then refuses to talk." "Never." I tapped her shoulder. "You know where he is, don't you?" She paused her digging, standing with a grip of the hoe. Her hands tightened around the wooden beam, as if trying to open a stubborn jar of jam. But then the woman returned to digging. I shoved her gently. The woman turned with the swiftness of an ancient samurai, staring me in the eye. Every part of her body appeared as if it were screaming to slap me across the face. I wasn't going to flinch, nor would I shy away. She remained tense, caught in emotion. "Go on, woman, take your wildest shot." I matched her dueling gaze. Then her body relaxed, all the muscles easing, and she turned away and returned to the digging. "Oh, you are not ignoring me," I said, and with that I stepped forward with the swiftness of a warrior myself, and whipped the hoe from her hands. I held it back, braced as if a baseball player with a bat. Two children stopped chasing each other and watched us, eyes unblinking with rapt attention. It felt wrong to attack the lady before young ones, but Tanton was missing, and I felt this woman had at least some knowledge of his whereabouts, so I would scare it out of her. "Tell me where my friend is," I said, "or I will slap the stare off your face." The lady slowly stepped backward, step over step as if performing some perfectly formed dance, and then she kneeled and gathered another hoe that was lying in the soil. She slowly took a fighter's stance, wielding the hoe. She glanced at my missing little finger. It would take more than a severed limb for her to whack a stick harder than me. "I beat you when we battled over Katie," I said, "and I will beat you again." She watched on, silent. Fed up, I jabbed my hoe forward. She whirled her hoe around in a rainbow-like arc and slapped mine from my hands. Undeterred, I gathered the hoe from the tilled earth, offering a swipe toward her ankles. She hopped it, and then jabbed the flat surface of the hoe's thin metal blade into my shoulder. It kicked like a mule and knocked me back. "So you enjoy swinging sticks," I said. I swung for her belly. She evaded it, and then swung her gardening tool into my backside as hard as a kick from a stallion. Not satisfied, she turned swiftly and struck my stomach with the blunt of the hoe. "You rotten woman," I coughed out, crouching and catching breath. A minor audience of half a dozen men and women had gathered, perhaps 6 or 7 more approaching. So it's a spectacle they want, I told myself, then a glorious show they shall have. I straightened and swung my hoe wildly, but she ducked it with a graceful lean, only to rise and whack my hoe from my hands and clip the back of my head. It knocked me down into the dirt, on all fours.
"Stay on your knees,"
the woman said. The crowd watched on, no doubt confident I'd remain eating dirt. But I had to stand. This woman knew something of Tantin. I stood with my body now swaying as we faced off in the vegetable patch, me deliberately stamping on some bright red bell peppers. "I'm gonna squash you like those vegetables," I said and swung for her ribs. With a downward thrust she blocked it, the wooden stick striking a clack that echoed across the village. I swung for her stomach, and she stepped aside and caught my hoe one-handed and thrust the flat blade of her hoe into my stomach. It felt like being struck by a charging rhinoceros. I fell to the ground, coughing and gasping. Thoughts of Tantin ran through my mind like a stampede of brumbies, and despite my body feeling as if it had been whipped up by a giant egg beater, I slowly stood. My next strike was whacked away, and she struck the back of my head, and down I went into the dirt, tasting the rich soil. I spat it out while staring at a squashed red bell pepper that appeared to be laughing with its tongue poking out. "Get up, girl." I struggled up onto all fours. A stick thunked over my back. I lay flat out in the dirt, all my body aching and my head swirling. But what did it matter if I took more beatings? Tantin could be facing similar treatment. I clawed the dirt, then painfully pushed up to my knees and feebly reached out for the hoe, grasping for it as if a blind person for a cane. As my fingers neared the stick, the woman scooped it up with hers and flung it away. Fight over. We caught eyes, and the woman's no longer had the aura of extreme hatred. There was no love there for sure, but the abhorrence had been purged. Small rod of silver. 3 children helped me stand. They didn't seem to want my thanks, and soon scurried away once they realized my own feet could bear the weight of my battered and bruised body. Everyone returned to their previous affairs, and the woman who had offered the beating pushed her wooden barrow of vegetables away. One elderly man with white hair and friendly eyes that sat below a wrinkled forehead told me of a place to bathe. I traveled to the small waterfall, about a 3-minute walk through the woods, not too far in for the bears, and bathed beneath the cool water, drinking some as I showered. After dressing, I sat on a wide, smooth rock and was soon approached by the handsome African. "You have the will of a lion, young madam," he said. "Avita," I said and rubbed my sore back. "And tell that angry woman to use her hoe on the garden, old man." "Salehi," he said and joined me on the rock.
"And you attacked Kiyoshi."
That truth silenced me for a moment. But I had good reason, or so I believed. She knows where my friend is. I can see it in her eyes. What is in her eyes, you see?
Definitely not affection.
Salehi gazed at the waterfall, eyes brimming with appreciation. "The man you killed in the jungle, just off the rocks. That was Naoko." Salehi looked me in the eye. It was her brother. It felt as if the surrounding oaks bent over, stretched out their branches and squeezed them around my abdomen. To lose your brother would be such a horrible experience, and to look upon his killer would be horrific. No wonder the woman eyed me as if I were an evil wolf. But did she truly hate me? After all, she had not sought revenge. Not yet. I finally glanced at Salehi. "Will." After the beating, it was humbling to utter her name. "Will Kiyoshi ram the hoe through my head while I am asleep at night?" She could have done that in the vegetable garden. I shook my head, confused. She wants me gone. Kiyoshi wants the pain gone, her brother to return. The woman's pain reminded me of my own. "Where is Tantin?" "He is still unconscious in a private room," Salehi said. "We are treating him and monitoring him." An image of Tantin lying in a bed unconscious rattled my bones. I gripped Salehi's arm. "Will he live?" Salehi calmly gazed at me.
"We are monitoring him."
"Why haven't you let me see him?" I said.
"We needed to learn if you had honor."
Who was he to examine me of honor? He had committed horrible acts. Like the honor you showed the 2 police in Stygian when you struck them and took their laser guns. "You saw that?" he asked. I was about to fly from the hotel upon a bed. His eyebrows picked up. That was you. You left the officers down. They weren't hurt, Salehi said, and they are crooked. I was searching for Katie, and they tried to arrest me. Why did you take Katie? Salehi gently pried my hand away from gripping his arm, and held it. We were protecting her and everyone from oppression. How? Her father was Oliver Monet. I sat upright. The owner of the Source Empire? Katie has inherited the empire, Salehi said. If Galleon can convince Katie to sign adoption documents, then he will gain ownership of the Source Empire and wield great power over the city. That horrible man used me. But he's the chief of police. Although he has a few loyal followers, he was removed from that office months ago for using Sveta's currency to fund the attack on the Welkin. The pirates. Salehi nodded. He orchestrated this whole thing. When the Welkin was in transit, Galleon had his men detain Claude Monet's egg for supposed security measures, but Pecoro stole it from him.
How do you know all this?
I was a detective, Salehi said. Galleon disposed of me once he knew I would not support his schemes. Then he looked along the path that led to the cottages. So I moved back to my home village. An interesting life Salehi had lived, and it would be interesting to hear more, but the discussion of the egg reminded me of something else, of being in the subway. A fine woman called Joanna told me the rebels would instruct Pecoro how to use the egg if he handed you Katie, and offered a running 10% of the income and control over Sveta. Salehi nodded. Lies to have him hand us Katie. And what you heard was not quite correct. We promised Pecoro we could get Katie to sign for adoption by using the egg's mechanics. Pecoro's dead now, I said. I saw him floating in the pool of eels. Pecoro was an eel, and what an eel Galleon had proven to be. But my mind left him for a moment to focus on another matter. Unbelievably, I had Katie with me this whole time. The crying child I picked up upon the Welkin in a desperate ploy to escape was wealthy beyond imagination. The life that sort of wealth could bring us on this planet would have unfathomable benefits. But first we needed to be reunited. I turned to Salehi. I have to get Katie. Salehi gazed up through the surrounding forest. The Twin Islands just off the shoreline has Oliver's private abode. After the egg was destroyed, it is the only place that has the mechanics to hand over the empire, a computer hidden inside a white table in the lounge. It's something Pecoro didn't know either. But Galleon and I do. He will have taken Katie there, hoping she signs for adoption. He could force her, I said. No, Salehi said. The sensors will detect fear and not accept the adoption. She must sign in a relaxed state. And it will take time for Galleon to win her trust. Galleon had won mine quite easily, so his wiles could undoubtedly work on a young girl. It left little time to waste. I stood. Where are you going? Salehi said. To get Katie. The house is protected by bizarre sources that were designed to protect Oliver and his family, Salehi said. You will be killed. I'll take a laser gun. Salehi shook his head. I won't give you one. Then I'll take a hoe. Salehi stood and took my hands. He held them how a father nurtured the hands of a crying child, or so it seemed. I'd never felt such affection from a father. Give Tantin time to recuperate, and for me to devise a plan. The next 2 weeks, Salehi assigned me to till the soil by Kiyoshi's side. Every so often I would swipe the hoe at her, and she would defend it, then knock me over. Then she'd be leering down and spitting out reasons for my beatdown. You're holding the handle too wide, and your attacks are obvious, and stop looking where you intend to strike. But sometimes I'd manage to defend her attacks, even get a few of my own hits in, but they were all using trickery, not skill. Mostly our battles saw me with new contusions, blooming over my skin like brown and purple cauliflowers. But each strike to my body seemed to soften her heart a little, as if my resoluteness impressed her. I was always visiting Tantin. They had him in a small cabin that had a secret room with a lovely view of a neat valley topped with trees. I tell him stories and rub his hair and feed him the finest vegetable soup. In time he joined me outside, displaying a much quicker way of winning over the affections of the locals. Even Kiyoshi was throwing him flirtatious smiles. Funny, she always ensured I'd notice. After Tantan had gained strength, Salehi and Kiyoshi approached us one evening as we gazed down the mountainside. "You have improved little with the hoe," Salehi said to me. "But it's time to go before Galleon convinces Katie to sign." It was great he was taking me to Katie, but had all the bruises on my body been necessary? I glanced at Kiyoshi. She glanced back with a straight set of lips, no hint of a smile. Was it important that I first be tenderized? Salehi shuffled a hand to a sheath he wore and withdrew a small rod of silver. He held it out as if a sword, squeezed a section with his finger, and out shone a white blade of energy. The same type Kiyoshi had attempted to use on me when I took Katie. "Along with laser guns, an energy blade will be useful to take to the island," Salehi said. "Kiyoshi has tried to instruct you on its use." He handed it to me. It felt like it had perfect balance. I swayed the energy source around.
A little lighter than a hoe.
"It will cut an arm clean off," he said, stepping back. "It's not a child's glow stick." I squeezed the release trigger and withdrew the blade. "Us four will leave in the morning," Salehi said. "We will try to sneak in, retrieve Katie, and sneak out. The Empire will be left to the townships to disperse energy evenly amongst the planet's inhabitants." If only this all worked out. It sounded so blissful. But danger loomed, and I touched the energy blade's handle, contemplating all the horrible things that could soon unfold. Tantan looked it over, hazel eyes scrutinizing. "Where is my blade?" "You had no time to learn," Salehi said. "You will only possess a shield and a laser." "A source blade too," Tantan said. Salehi shook his head. "You will be safer with the laser and shield." "I'm also taking a blade," Tantan said. Salehi shrugged, walked away and said, "Enjoy having one arm." Regular bubbles. Across the sea from the mainland's sandy and rocky shoreline sat the twin islands. The nighttime stars glittered upon the gray-white rock of the islands, the rock almost flickering as if of silver beneath, like silver pouring from a silver cup. The islands comprised one smaller lump of rock that sat before another, like two camel humps rising from the water. The second and larger island was decorated in trees amongst the stone. Beyond the minute forest, vaguely in view, were glimpses of the house of Oliver Monet. Us four stood upon the sandy shoreline and opened our laser shields and placed them in the water's edge. "We couldn't have taken a boat," I said. "These will be undetected," Salehi said. Remember, Oliver Monet had a bizarre source of protection for his family. Tantan edgily dropped his shield into the ocean. "What's so bizarre about it?" "We've only heard rumors that it's a strange source," Kiyoshi said. We crouched aboard our shields, then placed small turbines at the base, blue boxes the size of a fist that blew air into the water. A plethora of bubbles and swirls of white froth spilled out from beneath, and away our shields went, gliding and bouncing over the near-calm sea. Each wavy bump and every misty spray of sticky salt water over my face increased my nerves. So much was riding on this trip being successful, Tantan and I escaping with our lives, and I guess Salehi and Kiyoshi were important too, if not as close to my heart. And we had Katie to rescue. She could not be a pawn for Galleon to become an heir to a fortune and great power over the land. But could we rescue her off this island unscathed? And if so, could I eventually adopt her somehow and have control of the empire? Tantan, Katie, and I could finally live a beautiful life. No more heat of the day consuming me, nor the cold by night, nor sleep fleeing from my eyes over anguish. Pain and suffering would be no more. Passed away. The island appeared larger on approach, and when we pulled up to the jagged rocks at the base, it towered high and blocked the stars. It seemed to say, "Stay here forever, at least leave your bones." We gathered ourselves onto the rocky bank, tripping and slipping on the slippery, wet surface. A section of rock opened in what could be described as a mouth of a cave, literally an opened mouth. It dug into the rock in a great curve by the length of a hover truck. "We'll sleep here and head across to the other island in the morning," Salehi said, scuffing the earth with his boot. "Why not go now under the cover of the dark?" I suggested. "Too dangerous," Salehi said. "That makes no sense," I said. Salehi ignored me and sat on the ground, placing his energy blade handle alongside him. He withdrew a square heat box from his inside pocket and positioned it at his feet, and after I groaned again over not leaving now, we all gathered around the heat box as it threw out heat like a warm campfire and got to warming our bodies and drying our clothes and hair. Trifling chatter arose amongst us about the mainland and the state of its people. Then we lay upon the stone with our laser guns in hand's reach and quickly drifted towards sleep, but I had to remark, surely it will be safer to go in the dark. Salehi kept his eyes closed, then finally said, "The night is not safe." "Why?" "Shish," he said, and rolled over. "What's so scary about the night?" Tanton wrapped an arm across my shoulder and took me into his chest, running his hand through my hair. "Never mind," he said. "We'll search for Katie in the morning." As the unrisen sun began breaking a soft orange tincture into the dark horizon, a colorful bird swept into our cozy sleeping abode. The creature landed on the rock bed, appearing to be a species of cerulean falcon. It had a golden brown head with a light crown and off-white chin. Flecks of gold adorned its chest and black streaks swept around its sharp, inquisitive eyes that seemed to ooze exceptional vision. Its wings were a spotted golden brown with dark brown quills. It fluttered them, revealing they were thin and tapered and boasted of impressive speed and agility. It was nearly cuter than a puppy. "Such a pretty bird," I said, sitting up and stretching my arms. It made a loud cackle, as though it had a small fish caught in its throat. A small cauldron of its buddies glided in. The initial feathered creature flew forward and took a snap from my fingers, its beak clapped shut, thankfully empty. "It will take a finger clean off," Kiyoshi said, then threw a pebble at it. The bird hopped up and flew at her, whipping around her hair. She swiped at it, then it suddenly swooped down and curled its claws around Salehi's energy blade handle, the cast swooping in and curling their claws on our laser guns. Another went for our energy blades. Tanton drew his blade and swiped for the bird, but it weaved his attack and cut his hand with its claws. He dropped the deadly blade near his foot, nearly losing a toe. By the time he reacted, a bird swooped upon it. Kiyoshi quickly snatched hers from the claws of one and released the blade. She swiped at one animal, but it evaded her slash, and then the flock burst out of the cave and flew out over the blue water that was swimming with glimmering gold from the rising sun. Salehi shook his head. "Sorry. I made an amateur's mistake. It seems the animals are part of the bizarre protection, genetically engineered to protect Oliver Monet's family. They must have believed us to be a threat." Tanton said, "I nearly cut off my foot," and Salehi eyed him with a raised brow that said, "I told you so," and Tanton glared back and said, "Well, you lost your blade too," and Salehi threw out his arms and said, "I never spoke, and there was little point worrying about our lost weapons now," and so to break the tension I said, "What weapons do we still have?" "2 energy blades and 2 shields," Salehi said, then eyeing Tanton dubiously said, "Avita and Kiyoshi will take the blades." I agreed but didn't say it aloud. "What other animals live here?" I said. Salehi handed us all a can of protein-enhanced beans. "Eat up and let's go. There is only one animal I have heard the rumors of, and you will learn if the rumors are true soon enough." After a nerve-wracking breakfast that tasted as good as stale toast, Salehi led us from the crevice. The mountain was too steep and slippery smooth to climb, so we navigated slowly around the island on a narrow path that edged the water, carefully stepping upon the rocks, and on occasion linking hands and helping one another across small fissures. The sun had not gathered much warmth when we were around the first stage of the rock, and it opened up to a small gorge that ran between the 2 islands. Between the waterway was a section of stone that joined the islands, sort of a stone bridge with large, gaping holes in the rock beneath that allowed water to pass. The opposing island was larger, and all its rock walls traveled almost vertically to the top. A loop of white shiny steel posts protruded from the water, forming a fence that traveled around the mountain, encircling the center body of water and the entire main island. Is that to keep out sharks? I said. Salehi gazed at the strip of blue. Perhaps to keep them in. Whatever the breed of shark, it didn't matter, for my little friend waited on that island. And all that was required was to cross the water, so I took out my shield and opened it. We can sail faster than any fish. Salehi fixed his arm across my chest. If Oliver has sharks, they could be intelligent like the falcons. After all, there was the rumor the night is not a safe time to travel. Perhaps they are sleeping now and feed during the night. The sharks are probably a myth, Kiyoshi said, eyeing the water. Salehi pointed high and to the left, toward the stone bridge. That is where we cross. It appears a little thin, Tantan said. Hence its name, the nerve test, Salehi said. The bridge appeared more dangerous, more nerve-wracking now we had to cross it. But we sallied forth, and made our way along the edge of the water, carefully stepping upon the stones as we navigated toward the stone crossing. It felt much scarier to fall in this time, as the rumored sharks were apparently sleeping beneath. But that could all be tall tales told to keep out intruders. Either way, it wasn't stopping us. A crevice between rocks rose high to the foot of the bridge, and climbing it, we soon arrived at the edge of the cliff, where a 30-yard drop to the water loomed. The stone bridge ran out over the water. A gentle dip in the middle made it appear as though it were forming a smile. But it didn't feel like a welcoming smile amongst friends, but more of a sinister one. The structure and strength of the stone seemed fine, but it was thin, no wider than a footpath, and some edges had large cracks, the stone perhaps deteriorating over time, seemingly ready to break and plunge us into the depths. Hopefully millenniums of gentle waves haven't weakened it, I said. Kiyoshi, ever so brave, was the first to step upon the bridge, pressing the heels of her boots on the stones, testing them for stability. Looking down, she said, "Avoid any cracked or split edges," and away she went, slowly stepping forth. Salehi followed at a distance of a couple of arm lengths, and then Tantan stepped up and me last of all. The stones shone a little from the salty air, possibly making the stones a touch slippery in places. A gentle mist swept through on a soft whirling wind, carrying with it a touch of the salt. My boots clicked upon the stones, an eerie slip that did in fact test my nerves. The ocean gently lapped against the island's rocky edges below, a sound soothing and yet foreboding. The blue water had some clarity, revealing the occasional school of silver-bellied fish, and the sides of the rocks diving deeper into the blue. No giant great whites were circling beneath the surface. A crack came from ahead. Kiyoshi began slipping down the side of the bridge, but quickly clawed to the surface, keeping her torso above the bridge's level and her legs dangling down. 2 chunks of rock spun down through the air, then plunged into the water, making a loud kapoosh. Wriggling like a snake, Kiyoshi pulled herself up and turned back to smile at us, an expression showing she was all right. "Glad you held on," Tantan said. Salehi didn't seem concerned with Kiyoshi. Instead, he was intently gazing down at the water, scanning the surface. "The disturbance could have alerted something," he said. "It's best to keep moving." He waved Kiyoshi forward. I perused the blue, but saw only the occasional fish. We moved tentatively, preparing for cracked stones. While passing the chunk that broke off on Kiyoshi, a subtle shadow moved across the water, as if a cloud was temporarily passing the sun. But the morning skies were clear. Salehi raised his hand for us to stop. The shadow disappeared. We waited. The dark patch soon returned and darkened into a deep blue murk, but it had no fin and wasn't a shark. Instead, it was slowly emerging into some form of sea creature. "The myths are worse," my head kept saying. "Some weird creature lurks in the waters." It crept forward beneath the deep with gentle sweeps of its body. It appeared about the size of a humpback calf. I wriggled an inch closer to the center of the bridge. "We should keep moving," I said, church whisper quiet. Salehi shook his head. Given it followed the stone and is a security source, it could detect movement. The shadow closed in on the stone bridge, the murky figure rising and its outline becoming clearer. It had the body shape of a whale, but its head was bulbous and wide, like an octopus, small tentacles flowing from its mouth. A single tentacle rose, its outer skin scaled in a blue that reflected a purple when struck by the sun, and when it began feeling the sides of the stone bridge, it revealed bright pink flesh beneath. After finding nothing of interest, it pulled its tentacle back into the blue and dove into the deep, until disappearing into the gloom. Tantan looked at Salehi, as if he desperately needed to go to the toilet. "Can we move now?" That beast was huge, and although the tentacle didn't appear longer than a skiff, and it surely wouldn't reach up here to suck us down, I still wanted to get off this bridge badly too. "It can detect our movement off this bridge," I said. Salehi nodded and we moved on quietly. The other island closed in, a small path around the side of the cliff awaiting. Then came a puff from below. A slither of tentacles opened up in the water, the pinkish inners contrasting against the overlapping scales of vibrant blue. Another puff issued from the sea monster, and a fine spray of water flew into the air, as if from a blowhole. The monster rolled over, its fat violet-scaled belly catching the sun. With a twist it dove under, but remained swimming near the surface. We all paused. The monster began circling beneath the sizable gaps of the stone bridge. A fall would see us tumble into its horrible mouth. Salehi's eyes widened. "It's seen us. So we might as well scurry, right?" I said. "Right." Salehi faced the island. "Watch for cracked edges." Our careful steps crept along the stone top, skipping by a few sections that had cracks or splits, all the while glancing below. The beast quit circling and swept off with a rush of tremendous speed. It moved toward the island for which we traveled, and appeared to crash into the rock face. Is it blind and dumb? It hovered below the surface, face pressed against the island as if it were making out with the rocks, tentacles slipping around the slabs of stone. "It eats rock," I said. Tantan looked back. "Maybe sucking on barnacles." That seemed like a logical answer, and hopefully that's all it ate. The beast suddenly pulled back, and then drifted in the water, its rear leisurely lowering into the depths until the tangle of tentacles surfaced. Two eyes sat behind the tentacles, large and reddish-white with a black pupil that appeared soulless. It was watching us. It spread its tentacles to reveal a mouth, a slippery lining of reddish-pink gums surrounding multiple circles of tiny but sharp-looking teeth. It pursed its lips as if it were about to blow bubbles. "That doesn't look good." Another puff blew from its mouth, and a small barrage of stone shot forth. We quickly ducked to our knees and gripped the bridge edges as stones flew by. One smacked into my thigh, feeling like the hardest ever knuckle punch. Rocks flew over Kiyoshi and Salehi and they kept making for the cliff, but one struck Tantan in the ribs and he slipped over the side. I lunged forward and grabbed him under his arm. "Climb back up," I shouted, as his legs were kicking. "We gotta run." The beast returned to the rocks, sucking out chunks. A strike to the head would kill us, let alone the fall into the water. But it would be preferable to be dead before being eaten by the monster. Tantan was just securing himself back on the bridge as Kiyoshi landed upon the shore surface of the island's landing. Below, the monster rose from the water. Salehi made it off the bridge, turned, and with eyes so wide they must have nearly fallen out, called, "Hurry! And watch your step." A puff came from the monster. As we were running, a rain of rock bombarded us. A stone whacked into my stomach and knocked the wind from me. I stumbled forward, rolling. Tantan reached back and stabilized me, and with a swift move opened his shield. A scatter of stone barraged the laser shield, making a ricocheting clatter like a hailstorm upon a roof. Rat-a-ta-ta, rat-a-ta-ta. Tantan's arm shook as it held the shield under the heavy blows. We locked eyes and I tried to say thank you through my gaze, my heart thumping. The storm of stones soon abated and Tantan closed the shield. The beast rolled in the water, and we moved on and made it to the rock face, hunching back with Salehi and Kiyoshi against a slab of stone that formed near perfect cover. Enough air blew back and forth from my lungs to inflate an air mattress. Eventually I calmed myself, and we all stood staring, disbelieving the events. We asked one another if we were badly injured, but all were okay, except my stomach would bruise and Tantan's ribs maybe too. Some time passed and we saw no more sight of the monster, no murky shadow drifting through the water. It became obvious we could not hide forever. The island rose above us in brilliant grayish-white stone, piercing the blue sky. So where to now? I said, there's no way of climbing up. Salehi took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for battle. He stepped forward and pointed to another stone path that crept around the mountain. It sat about the same height as the bridge, and was about as narrow as the footbridge, skinnier in places, and it led back around the island, right back in front of the dreaded body of water. Right by the monster. Are you sure we can't go the other way? I said, and leaned out and looked around. It was a pure wall of grayish-white rock. Salehi remained pointing beyond the strip of water. The path leads to a narrow crevice that climbs in footholds to the island's surface. Tantan grabbed Salehi's arm. But that ugly fish will spit more damn stones. Calm yourself, Salehi said. There is no other way. I rubbed my face and my hair and gripped my hair and rubbed my face again. So it's best to go now instead of the night. I said. At least we can see it now, Salehi said, then opened his laser shield, held it up, and took the first tentative step along the cliff-fronting path. We followed, but at a more intimate distance than upon the bridge, at arm's length, close enough to huddle up under Salehi's and Tantan's shields if the monster spotted us and started spitting stones. The path was narrow, only a few feet, and so we trod carefully, hoping no part of it would crumble. The wind whispered around the rocks with a frightening chill. The water between the islands gently swayed, but no ominous shadow swirled through the blue. We leveled up in the middle of the two islands, and it appeared we would creep past, until a wide-bodied length of shadow swept in from the smaller mound of rock. Do we run? I said. No, we could fall, Salehi said. We have some time. It still has to suck up some rocks. We moved along as the beast came straight for us, a trail of disturbed water trailing its body. It rose from the depths until the blue scaly back breached the surface. It roiled up in the water and the pink tentacle-surrounded mouth squeezed open, and then came the puff, and out shot a mouthful of stones. Salehi protected Kiyoshi with a shield, and Tantan braced his shield before me. The barrage of rock struck, and Tantan barely held the shield handle. It vibrated like a cymbal struck upon a drum kit, and he dropped it. A few rocks skipped past and the shield fell and tumbled, smacking the face of the cliff, then splashing flat-bellied upon the water. The rocks quit flying, but we had lost our protection. I thought it needed to suck more rocks, I said. Tantan shrugged. It must have sucked them earlier and waited as a trap. Sorry about the shield. That was never his fault. Thanks for protecting me. No time for romance, Salehi said, looking back. We must make the crevice before it gathers more stone. We straightened our backs and kept moving, but the hideous creature was not done, and it opened its mouth once more. Surely it had no more rocks. It released a mighty puff, and then out shot a spatter of purple wobbly objects like balloons of water. Kiyoshi opened her energy blade and swiped the first blob. It split apart and splatted against the wall of rock. As the barrage of blobs approached, Salehi called, "Huddle up," and raised his shield. We crowded together like avoiding heavy rain beneath a single umbrella. The purple blobs smacked the shield and spattered against the rock face. They made a squish sound when they struck the stone, then wobbled and wiggled as they fell. Suddenly I heard Kiyoshi cry, "Ah!" and at the same time one of the wobbly objects nicked my elbow that was jutting from the shield. Incredible nerve-pinching pain spread to my fingertips and up to my shoulder blade. Kiyoshi fell from the path and began tumbling down the rock face, her energy blade falling from her grasp and sliding away. The monster swiveled in the water, sensing her fall. A horrible flash slithered through my mind. That monster is gonna eat Kiyoshi. Immediately, Salehi took the shield from our cover and jumped on it and rode it down the mountain like a snowboard. Tantan and I clung to each other, watching. Kiyoshi tumbled out of control, closer to the water. A tiny ledge of flattened stone spread out below them, and Salehi dove from the shield and grabbed hold of Kiyoshi, tumbling onto the patch of landing and bouncing against a jutting-up slab of stone. A few fragments chipped and fell from the stone, which looked like a fat rhinoceros horn. The shield remained wobbling down the rock and then struck the water, both of our defense systems gone. Kiyoshi and Salehi appeared fine for now, both lying tangled on their rock platform. Salehi slowly pushed off Kiyoshi, and she raised her head, a twisted face revealing agony. The purple blob remained clutched to her shoulder. The sea monster remained hovering about the surface, watching its two near victims. It shot out no more purple blobs, which was good, but then it slowly began to approach the two. Its tentacles could reach them, I said to Tantan. We have to get down there. Tantan and I looked around the cliff face, searching for footholds. But it appeared so slippery we could slip and slide to our doom. But then there. Tantan shouted, pointing to a crevice in the stone that wriggled down the wall of rock and ran a few yards from the landing that held our companions. Let's go, I said. But carefully. As we slowly crammed our boots and hands into the crevice of stone and jigged our way down, I kept an eye on the sea monster. It had swum to the wall and was looking up at Salehi and Kiyoshi. Can you climb up? I called out. I can, Salehi said, but then looked at Kiyoshi. But we need this globule cut off Kiyoshi so she can climb. Your energy blade will do it. We're coming, I said. The sea monster hunkered its fat belly against the wall of stone and squirmed a little higher out of the water, revealing all its mouth and the tangle of tentacles, the soulless eyes and more of its violet underbelly. Then the unthinkable happened. It began raising a tentacle, smoothly moving over the surface in a twisting motion, feeling its way up the mass of rock. Tantan called out, "It's reaching for you." We still had a ways to travel, and could only slightly increase our slow and secure pace. Salehi placed Kiyoshi against the wall, and then grabbed the tip of the rock that was shaped like the rhinoceros horn. He began pulling and shoving at the stone, forcing his whole body into it. The tentacle rose higher, slithering around the edge of the rock. The portion of stone gave way, and Salehi now possessed a piece of jagged rock. The tip of the tentacle crept over the rock's edge, as if smelling for victims, testing the slippery surface. Salehi held up the rock, then like digging a hoe into hard soil, he thrust the piece of stone down and smashed it into the tentacle tip. The sound made a mix of a squish and a whack. The sea monster whipped its limb back, arching it up like a hissing cobra. Dark purple blood dripped from the lacerations, but the creature would not retreat. The monster slithered higher up the cliff, and another flexible limb twirled toward them like a rapidly growing vine.
It's sending another.
I called. Salehi swung the stone at one tentacle, but while it had him occupied, the other tentacle snaked over and wrapped around Kiyoshi's ankle. It has Kiyoshi. Tantan called. The beast began to drag Kiyoshi toward the edge while she clung to the stone, crying out, "Don't let it eat me." Salehi leaped on the arm, ramming the stone again and again onto the tentacle. Spatters of purple gunk splashed out, like a butcher hacking at fresh meat. Vile creature. Salehi called. Villain of the sea. And he kept assaulting it with vicious blows. The tentacle thrashed around, as if a fish caught on a hook, trying to pull Kiyoshi down and trying to avoid the barrage of Salehi's assault. He kept hacking and had the limb half severed, but then the other tentacle snuck from behind and grabbed his wrist of the hand that held the rock. If we don't reach them now, they are both gone. It was a few feet across to their platform, but I leaped out of our crag and landed on the stone, Tantan following. "Help Salehi," I said, and drew my blade handle. With a flick of the trigger, the white source of power streamed forth, and with a single swipe, I severed the tentacle clean in half, releasing Kiyoshi's ankle. But this battle was far from over. The purple blob remained sucking on her shoulder, like a leech feeding. I stabbed it with the blade. It separated and fell off, and I flicked its parts toward the water. I secured Kiyoshi on the landing, then heard Tantan cry, "Help!" and I turned to see Salehi dragged over the edging stone, and Tantan clinging to his wrist. I stood over them to gather a view of the tentacle to cut it off, but it had Salehi's ankle, and was beyond striking range. "Pull him up," I called and helped grab Salehi's hand. Tantan and I heaved with all our strength, and Kiyoshi was crying, "Don't let that monster kill him," and Salehi crept higher until his eyes peeked over the ledge, and he grabbed hold of the large chunk of stone. We shared a glance, and it was as if we were finally becoming true allies. Friends even. With a sudden tremendous jerk, the sea monster pulled at Salehi. His hand slipped from our grasp. It happened so quickly. The monster whipped him down the wall of stone and sucked him into the water. It wrapped 3 tentacles around his shoulders and waist, securing him like bandages upon a mummy. The vile fish shoved Salehi's foot into its hideously sucking mouth. Salehi's scream echoed throughout the watery canyon. The monster dove and took him into the depths, silencing his piercing cries. A trail of irregular bubbles rose and then a gentle wave washed over, kissing into the rock. Tanton and I sat staring into the blue. Mere moments ago we held the hand of our friend, now our hands were empty. The hand that once held mine so gently, now will never ever offer another touch. A numbness rippled through my body, a surreal mix of disbelief and horrible truth. No. He did not disappear, I kept telling myself. Salehi will resurface. He has to. He will fight that thing off. But the longer we sat staring with unblinking eyes, the more it sunk in that Salehi had given his life to save Kiyoshi, and our sitting stunned would never bring him back, but only allow time for the return of the monster. Tanton stood and took my hand. We have to go, he said, and I rose with him. Kiyoshi sat looking vacantly into the deep blue, a gentle breeze blowing her tousled hair. It's not your fault, I told her. All 3 of us remained silent as Tanton and I assisted Kiyoshi on the slow and painful climb back up to the path. Our breathing was heavy and movement slow, but we moved as best as we could. Upon reaching the path we followed it along, all the while glancing at the water for the return of the beast, but it seemed content with its full belly. After a short while the crevice that climbed the remainder of the island appeared, and we began making our way up. Kiyoshi groaned in pure agony as we carried her along. The crevice drew us toward the top of the rock island, soon to level out on our final destination, Oliver Monet's house. Would more of our lives be lost? Could these be our final moments? I tried my absolute best not to consider how Salehi's final moments were spent in the deep abyss. I tried not to ponder it, but didn't succeed. Bill clapping snaps. A cluster of jagged rocks poked up around us like graveyard stones. After the stones was a crop of woods, tall timber trees topped with a spread of thick interlacing branches that spread out like a great green tent. Beyond the strip of forest were glimmers of Oliver Monet's white stone house. The property currently belonged to Katie. Galleon and Katie would be inside. Was Galleon expecting us? Probably. Sweat was pouring from Kiyoshi's head, slipping down the curves of her face, her breathing heavy and desperate as though she were going into labor. Clearly she could not help us. We sat Kiyoshi behind a pyramid-shaped stone. Galleon won't fight fairly, Kiyoshi said. We will return for you, Tanton said. Kiyoshi looked at us gravely.
Maybe.
Tanton and I began making our way through the graveyard-like patch of stones. The freestanding rocks emitted an eerie feeling that we would be heading to our graves. The handle of the energy blade remained in my holster, hidden beneath my shirt but in hand's reach. If we failed, I only hoped at least Katie could grow into an honorable woman and lead a good life. A life that would help the people of this planet and not extort them. The stones scattered away upon entering the compact forest. The air smelled pure and sweet. The treetops were thick and lush, protruding gnarled roots tangled over the soil like swollen varicose veins, evidence a rich patch of soil lay beneath. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, the mid-morning sun showering through cheerful speckles of light. A group of branches rocked ahead, ruffling a canvas of leaves. Sounds of whipped and whirring wind whispered from the woods, the noises swiftly moving along and leaving a trail of swaying, swishing branches. Birds. The flapping of wings rippled closer, although the birds remained hidden. The falcons we encountered on this island were not friendly, but a pest. Would these be troublemakers? The birds then dove from the branches and came into sight. The squadron of 4 was pelican in shape, only larger, white wings long and broad tipped in black, the whites of the feathers shimmering with a silver glow upon catching the sun. Hide, Tanton said, and took my arm and swept me behind a wide-trunked tree. They only have bills, I said. Not teeth. No animals here have been pleasant, Tanton said quietly. The 4 birds landed awkwardly across a running stretch of 20 yards amongst trees. Settled, they ruffled their feathers, then began to scratch the ground around a thick shrub. They kept scuffing around the woody plant, clawing at the soil. One poked its long pointy bill into the fine stems of the bush. It kept its bill hidden amongst the lush leaves for a while, the bird swiveling its head. It removed its bill and looked to the others. It released a goof goof from the depths of its throat, a deep hoarse grunt as if from a big fat pig. Its 3 companions began stalking around the shrub like lions through long grass. They spread out and formed a perfectly positioned 4-piece barricade of the defenseless plant. Although the scoop of pelicans was impressive in size, we could not let them halt our plans.
We need to be saving Katie, I whispered to Tanton.
Shish, he said. During our silence, the large birds threshed their slender mandibles into the shrub until they were buried up to their eyeballs. They started a cacophony of squawking and bill snapping, causing loud popping to resonate from their throats. A rabbit dashed from the bush with its white tail bouncing. But acting faster, one bird snapped its bill down, clapping it over the midriff of the animal. The rabbit kicked its legs wildly, as if trying to run on air. Then the other gigantic pelicans waddled over, thrust their bills forth and tore into the animal. I looked away, hiding into the confines of Tanton's chest. That's awful, I said. Tanton shrugged. Guess they have to eat. But we better be careful of them. The sounds of the birds eating continued, barking and snapping bills. I looked back toward the gravestone rocks, toward Kiyoshi. She was hidden amongst the stones, out of view. Hopefully the birds would not fly down to investigate her. Soon the birds walked away, a section of the green shrub spattered in crimson. They flapped their great wings and took to the branches above. We stood in shock for a short while until Tanton said, "Time to go." I turned from the trunk, and there stood a giant rabbit-eating pelican with its sharp long bill dripping in blood at the down-curved hook. Brandishing a display of powerful breast muscles, it stretched its long neck and looked me dead in the eye without fear. Its black, staring eye surrounded by red facial skin. "We have been spotted," I said, and Tanton turned around to see the bird. "I've never faced off against a giant pelican," he said. It swayed its head back and forth, contemplating the human before it. It aggressively waved its black-tipped wings, which expanse was impressive, a vast display of broad width and ruffling feathers. It had webbed feet like a pelican, except its thick orange claws extended beyond the web like bony fingers that ended with a sharp hook. It was a ferocious-looking bird. But just a bird. "Step around it," I said, and walked out from the tree. The bird thrust forward and snapped hold of my thigh. It bit like a bulldog. Tanton wrapped his hand around the creature's neck, and it immediately let go and snapped a hold of the breast of his shirt. Tanton released the animal, and it pulled back and tore a chunk of the top, the white fabric flapping like a flag in its mouth. The 3 others swooped in with a sound of rushing wings, quickly settling around us. I took out the blade handle and released the blade of white energy. "Cut off one's head," Tanton said. The thought of an angry pelican's head lying on the ground was sickening, disturbing. "They just need a scare," I said, then swiped toward one, but it swiftly maneuvered its head around and took a snip of my other thigh. It hurt like a million little sisters pinching all at once. Instinctively, I swung the blade down with a force that would split a log, but the fast animal dodged again like a cobra. "Faster than an angry alley cat," Tanton said. The birds would not let us move, let alone allow approach to the house, and they seemed determined to eat us. At least take out chunks of our meat. Our tree of protection offered a neat idea. I swiped the sword through one of the low-hanging branches, then sliced through another. "Pruning," Tanton said. "The branches will guard us." After I returned the energy blade into the holster, we each gathered up a hefty branch. We stood back to back and held out the branches, each containing many offshoots that formed a barricade. Our steps were slow and sure as we began to traverse the woods. The wretched birds barked their throaty goof-goof and snapped at the branches. One grabbed hold of mine and shook it, whipping its sturdy neck. It reminded me of Dante's Rottweiler Chuffy, when we'd play tug-of-war with a rag, and he'd shake and thrash the other end until I dropped it. But I held on to the branch. After countless bill-clapping snaps, the woods broke apart and the house approached, no more than a quick dash away. The birds suddenly ceased attacking the branches and watched us for a while. None of us moved. I glanced at the house. Its boulder-sized white stones shone in the warmth of the sun, the front was closed and its bordering windows were uncurtained, revealing an empty room. The curved house swept around until one side perfectly edged the cliff. No chance of walking around that way. But do we run for the door? The birds suddenly took flight amongst the woods, weaving in and out of the trees with moves that would impress an acrobatic jet pilot. They've lost interest, I said. They banked amongst the branches and began swooping back, barking in a full, throaty voice. No, Tanton said.
It's death from above.
The branches were too heavy to swat them, and so they could attack our heads with ease.
Into the house,
I said, and we dropped the branches and ran. We stepped upon the stone porch that bordered the house, the birds swooping. I took the energy blade and sliced it beside the door handle. It sparked and slid open and we dashed inside, then quickly pushed the now broken door closed. The birds landed outside. They grunted and barked for a short while, loud and angry bursts that rattled their throats. But they soon grew bored with us, and then waddled off and flew away. Tanton looked at me, catching his breath. It would have been easier if he had guard dogs. The birds were a strange choice of Oliver Monet, but it wasn't time to ponder that. Let's find our friend, I said. Hologram pen. The section of the house we stood in was an open-roomed curved space. Gigantic windows stretched from marble floor to marble ceiling, bordered by stone pillars of white marble, all of it edging the cliff face, beautified by the ocean stretching out to the horizon. It appeared more of a resort than a home. However, the corridor and black doors opposite the windows probably led to more usual aspects of the house, bedrooms and bathrooms and all. A rich person's house I dreamed of buying while aboard the Welkin, attempting to steal the source rod. The white table sat in the middle of the room, containing the device Salehi mentioned that could officially adopt Katie, and hence, hand over ownership of the empire. The group of gigantic pelicans suddenly swooped down by the windows, flapping their powerful wings to allow them to hover, and then landing on a thin strip of ledge. They peered through the glass at us with their evil eyes surrounded by the red facial skin, long bills occasionally clacking on the glass. Hopefully they cannot sneak in, Tanton said. The sounds of the birds clipping their bills on the windows was suddenly taken by a more daunting noise, a clip-clip of shoes upon the polished marble. Galien entered the room from the side corridor. His light brown hair remained the same, but it felt as if his gray eyes that appeared as clouds concealing secrets had split apart to reveal a traitor. Confirming that was a smirk on his face and a laser in his hand pointing at our stomachs. We only want Katie, I said. And with her, Galien said, motioning his free hand around the house, all the riches of Oliver Monet's source empire. Owning the empire was tempting, my lifelong dream of wealth. But it wasn't everything. I came here for Katie, I said. Galien walked over to the table in the middle of the room, pressed a button on the table's side, and a translucent screen rose out of its middle. You can adopt Katie, he said. Then sign over the rights to the empire to me. Where is she? Tanton said. Galien withdrew a remote from his pants pocket, and soon one of the black doors slid open. A clatter of feet was heard scurrying across the floor, then Katie burst into the room. She slid to a stop outside the doorway, her blonde curls whirling around her face. Upon laying sight of us, her blue eyes lit up as if they were beacons of her joy, and she ran toward us. It was such a relief watching her, and I knelt and took her into my arms, swinging her around in a great circle from her momentum. Tanton joined us in the hug. Embrace later, Galien said with aggravation gripping his voice. Sign the forms. We stood from our huddle, and I noticed the birds remained by the windows. Their dark eyes surrounded by the red, leathery skin followed Katie intently, just like Dante's Rottweiler Chuffy eyed his master. Quicken the pace, Galien said. We all walked toward the table together, Galien all the while tracing us with the laser gun. Although the energy blade handle remained hidden beneath my shirt in the holster, offering a chance to strike Galleon dead and save Katie, and have the benefits of all the Empire. I was not planning on risking anything. "Where do I sign?" I said upon reaching the table. Galleon eyed Katie angrily. "Brat of a child wouldn't sign the adoption form for me." He then pressed the screen a few times and the adoption form appeared, a host of words that took some time to scan. Impatient, Galleon tapped the areas to sign. "You and Katie sign here, and the girl is officially your daughter." It was such a surreal feeling, adopting a girl I had only just met, and one I had tried to use as bait to save my own life. Now I was signing my life away for her. I lifted Katie onto the table. She took the hologram pen from off the table and scribbled her name twice. She handed the pen to me and I did likewise. And it was done. Katie was officially my daughter. My cheeks flushed with a warmth, humbled by it all. Tanton roughed his hand through Katie's hair and kissed me on the cheek. Galleon, unimpressed with the moment, quickly pressed the screen until the forms for signing over the Source Empire appeared. For this brief moment, the Empire was mine. All of it. I was one of the wealthiest people on Cerulean. Thoughts thudded through my mind like a stampede of wild brumbies. We could enjoy our every breakfast at this lovely home, Tanton, Katie and I, on a quiet morning, watching the pure gold sun rise over the vibrant blue that stretched along until it joined the mainland, where boats drifted by and the pelicans, normal, Earth-like pelicans, nested and waited to catch fish from fishermen. But Galleon would shoot us all dead very quickly, if I did not scrawl the hologram pen across the dotted line. But the source blade remained hidden in my holster. Could I draw it out and cut off Galleon's hand that held the gun before he fired it? I wasn't as fast as the big-billed birds, but I was swift. "Hurry up," Galleon said, flicking the laser gun toward the screen. Perhaps I could cut off his hand before he pulled the trigger, but there were grander things in life than the riches of the Empire. I reached forward with the pen and signed away my old, worn-out dreams. Us three were broke, but together. Slowly, Galleon raised the pistol at all of us. "I just gave you the Empire," I said. "But once Katie is 18, Galleon said, "she is free to reclaim it. There is only one way to ensure she won't come looking for her big daddy's business. And to ensure you two don't seek revenge." Galleon was just like Dante and his father, greedy as a starving hyena, with no honor. After all this, the wretched man was gonna shoot us dead. Galleon glanced toward the birds. "Your corpses won't go to waste," he said, and took a step back, steadying himself. "The Galapagos pelicans will enjoy a tasty treat." The birds remained perched across the edging of the windows, tapping their bills on the glass. They appeared so hungry, desperate for a meal, like a group of starving seagulls pestering over a fisherman's catch. Galleon had planned our gruesome end. Never could I allow that, I thought, not without a final fight. The final fight. Our lives depended on my swiftness with the energy blade. The blade remained hidden in my holster, and whether Tanton's, Katie's, and my life would end by having our bodies blown open with laser holes and then chewed in the stirring black of a killer pelican's oversized stomach, whether Katie would live to run upon the sandy beaches or Tanton would fish in the brilliant blue rivers, whether I would live to embrace the two of them in affectionate hugs, all depended on my celerity with the blade. From our position under the range of Galleon Washington's laser gun, in this house edging a cliff that overlooked the sea, it appeared as if our chances had burned up like the ship Welkin. Not because the sky was red, it was near as blue and innocent as the iris of Katie's eye. But because our situation was hopeless. For I was not as swift as Kiyoshi. Nor as agile. The only occasions I ever defeated Kiyoshi was with my tricks. I glanced at the pelicans on the windowsill. They didn't seem to be eyeing us like before. What did that mean? It was difficult to ponder as sirens droned in my head, a harrowing thump-thump, and it felt as if I would faint. Then I realized the thumping was from my heart beating, harder and stronger, and not just out of fear. Out of love for my friends and out of hope. And then the fear gave way to a rising surge of strength, a will that would not lie down and die. For there were ways that I defeated Kiyoshi. My tricks. I didn't hide my next move from Galleon. I challenged him. taunted him. With an icy stare, I slowly lifted the trim of my shirt to reveal the blade handle. Galleon smirked. I took it and turned it on while drawing it across my body. The white light flashed forth. I glanced at Tanton, who held Katie.
Get behind me.
Galleon smiled confidently. You're not quick enough to swipe away laser fire with a source blade. I inspected his laser gun, glanced at the blade in my hand. My breathing tightened and my heart rate picked up further, testing the confines of my ribcage, and I had to take a deep breath to control myself. But Galleon was right. I would not be fast enough to whack laser fire from the air. The birds could do it, maybe. In fact, the birds were so fast they could do all sorts of damage. Then there is no need for me to wield this weapon, I said, knowing fighting him was never my intention. It was always the birds. I held out the energy blade and flung it toward the windows. It swiveled through the air, a whirling blade of light. The birds saw it coming, and with their rapid reactions took flight. The blade struck the glass and exploded through it. The sound was tremendous, like a rush of a waterfall, the blade falling and the glass spewing out over the cliff. We all ducked on instinct. The great pelicans banked in the air and flew back. The birds swept inside, the sounds of the ruffling wings tremendous. They eyed Katie and 3 swooped around us, 1 flew around Galleon pecking at his hand. But they didn't assault us. Tanton stood with wide eyes, holding Katie. They're not attacking. Because they are genetically designed to protect Katie. I called. Now grab their legs and fly out of here. The hint that the birds would now defend us first came to me when I saw them eye Katie, the way they watched her so carefully. Salehi had said Oliver Monet had bizarre means to protect his family, and for now the birds had safeguarded Galleon because he had Katie, but now he held the gun. One bird remained pestering Galleon, pecking at him. He swore and cursed nearly loud enough for people to hear on the mainland, and fired random shots that all missed and struck the ceiling. Tanton kept hold of Katie, and with the other hand snared the leathery skinned legs of a bird. It glared at him with its round black eyes but didn't squawk, it knew what to do. It flew, while Tanton ran with it to the edge of the window. The free bird followed, and I grabbed another bird's leathery legs. This better work. The free bird took to flight first, then Tanton stepped off the window's edge. He and the bird and Katie plunged, falling from sight. No. I rushed to the window's edge, and then Tanton rose from the depths. He clutched the legs of the great winged creature, one arm secured around Katie's waist. Get Katie to safety. I called. I'm coming, and the great bird flew them away. I prepared to leap, then a blue light flashed over my shoulder and struck my bird through its neck. It squawked out loud as blood smeared across the adjacent window. The animal fell from my grasp and tumbled lifelessly down the cliff's edge, smacking and hitting rock. Before it struck the water, I turned to see Galleon approaching with the laser. I cannot jump, so I must charge. I ran at him, and as he raised the gun, I ducked and caught his arm, holding the weapon up. He fired and the laser beam spanked off the ceiling, leaving burning flame. He punched my stomach below my sternum, and it winded me and knocked me back on my ass. The opened window frame was just behind, and I looked up to see another bird dead by the table. Galleon stood over me, wielding the laser. After your dead body splashes into the sea, I'll hunt and kill your friends. Tanton and Katie were flying free, but my life was about to end. Sitting on the edge of the window frame with the ocean waiting for my body was a terrible and lonely feeling. The ocean would take me from the rocks and wash me into its depths for the sea life to eat. I appeared so helpless before him. But his enjoying the moment allowed me to gather breath. Enough breath for another fight. Don't miss, I said. As Galleon's arm lowered in careful aim, I quickly swung my leg up and kicked his hand. The laser gun flew from his grasp and spun out the shattered window. I tried to get up, but Galleon jumped on me, flattening me out on the hard stone floor and wrapping both hands around my neck. Galleon's face burned with rage. I'll end you with my hands. He squeezed so tight, like an anaconda wrapping its body around my neck, all air cut off. Moments remained. I tried to peel his hands off, my fingernails piercing skin, but his grip was way too strong. I managed to kick at him, wild flays of my knees and boots, but none of it had an impact. He was ending my life, no matter what clobbered him. He pushed my head back beyond the window, and as the wind blew my hair, I glimpsed the shoreline way below, the ocean rushing into the wall of rock, hungry for me. If this is where it all ends for me, I thought, then I will also end the threat to my family. I stopped grabbing at Galleon's hands, and quit kicking and kneeing the horrible man, and instead, focused all my energy on moving my body. I clamped my boots to the stone floor, planted my palms down and spread my fingers, and then began to push myself back. An ungainly jerk followed, my body moving like a seal wobbling over land. Galleon remained on me, staring into my eyes as if his were lasers trying to burn mine away. I lurched backward again, and the top half of my back slid out over the edge. Galleon glanced down the cliff. His countenance changed. His eyes morphed from hellish murder to chilled concern for his own death, and his grip around my neck relaxed ever so slightly. He knew what was coming. "I'll use my blade," Galleon said, and desperately reached toward his belt. With him releasing a hand, I pushed back even farther, and my backside slid past the window. Galleon tipped forward like a toppling heavy wheelbarrow. Out we tumbled. I flipped over, a complete cartwheel, my body bashing over the stone. The bruising hits were mixed by the booming screams of Galleon. I reached forward, at least I think it was forward, in the tumble it was hard to tell, and I clutched at the island's colossal wall, searching for a jutting rock. My hands struck something solid and I clutched it, but the force of the fall broke my grip and I fell again. Almost instantly another lump of rock slipped beneath my hands, and I grabbed hold, tearing the skin on my hands. The toe of my right boot quickly found a tiny crevice to jab into. I had stopped falling. Unbelievably, I was clinging to the giant wall of stone and not plunging to the sea. My heart was thumping so hard it could have nearly cracked the rock pressed against my chest. I felt around with my left boot and found another bump in the rock. Suddenly, I was secured. As secure as possible on the sheer cliff. My hands were clinging to a piece of rock shaped like a small horn of a rhinoceros. A chilling reminder of Salehi's death, but this stone had saved me. Still, I needed to get back up to the house, and my energy was waning. The cliff stretched straight up, only offering a few bumps and nooks and occasional jagged edges. An extremely difficult climb, but with particularly careful grabs and holds and pulls, it could be done, although it would have been preferable to have the extra aid of my little left finger. The nub at the knuckle would have to do. I slowly took my right hand from the rhino stone and reached up and clung to a groove, my skinny biceps hurting. "I'm gonna make this," I told myself. "I have to. Tanton and Katie are waiting." Then a hand snared my ankle, a tight grip of fingers. Galleon. It felt like the waves crashed up and washed me over with despair. I looked down and there was the former chief of police, clinging to the rock face with one hand and an arm fully stretched to reach my boot. And he had an advantage. The tumble took him to a fortunate place where his feet had a foothold. It wasn't much, little more than a sole of a boot wide, but it was more than my toe-sized nooks. "You're going into those rocks," Galleon said. After a drop of 50 feet was a scene so dramatic and breathtaking that it momentarily dazed me. It wasn't the beauty of the island that stole my attention, but a terrifying scene of destruction that loomed to be the last ever place where I would take my final breath. The rock face slid straight down across the whole width of the island, like a monstrous turtle's shell that was almost purely vertical. The bottom was edged by a lumpy mix of round and jagged stone that breached the water with every passing wave, the water receding in rhythm to reveal a stone bed of certain death. It would be a quick death, a splat upon the stone, to where I'd be slowly washed off the surface and taken away to the deep. "Do not give in to despair," I told myself. "Keep fighting." Mustering desperate drops of energy, I shook my leg in an attempt to shake Galleon's grip. It made me lose my fragile hold of the rhino stone, so I stuck my boot back into the small nook. Galleon suddenly released the slippery surface of my boot, but didn't let go of me for more than a blink. Instead, he tightened a fist of fingers around the hem of my pants. "Down you go," he called. He gave a quick tug, and at the same time I kicked my leg again, and unexpectedly his fingers fell away. I quickly pulled on the rhino stone and stepped up a few inches, placing my boots into another crag. Galleon cried out, "Quit the fighting." Looking down, I was just beyond his reach. I quickly searched for a loose chunk of stone to pry off and toss at his head, my eyes scanning the gray-white rock. But there was nothing but the slab of island, an immovable piece of hard earth. Climbing was the only option. Despite feeling no energy in my body, I reached again, my fingers slipping over little bumps and slithering cracks. The sound of the ocean waves kept splashing over the stone, and my gentle grunts escaped my mouth along with my panting, and Galleon kept grunting, attempting to climb. But then came another noise. One more horrible, a tremendous puff. It blew from way below. It couldn't be. I dared to look toward the ocean, and there the hideous tentacle-mouthed whale approached the edges of the island, its blue-scaled body briefly breaching the surface to blow air. Galleon had heard it too, and he was looking down, perhaps thinking the same as me, "Do not let me fall into that thing's mouth." The monster steadied and looked up, the black bulging eyes transfixed. Its vision good enough to spot two humans clinging upon a cliff. Please let it have no more globular stingers. If those purple blobs struck me now, there would be no escape. The great fish began gnawing at the island, tentacles slipping over it. It seemed it was out of stingers and needed the stones. We were about to cop a blasting. I clung on and hoped. Hoped all stones would miss vital parts of my body, and that Galleon would receive a rock to the back of the skull. A moment later a big puff bellowed from the monster, and a barrage of stone clattered into the island. But it all struck below me, and even Galleon. We were out of reach. There was no time for breathing a sigh of relief because then came another sound, a fast ripping shzing. Earlier, Galleon had said he had a blade. I peered down to see it in his hand. But it was not of sword length, but rather a small energy dagger. He clung to the stone with one hand while the other held out the glowing white blade. He swiped for me, but my legs were beyond reach. "You need arms like that, monster," I called. He grimaced and swung the blade again. But he made no attempt for my ankle. Instead he rammed the blade into the stone, jamming it in. He secured a hand around it, and then pulled himself up and said, "I only needed a little more height," and he took to wrapping another hand around a jutting piece of stone and securing his boots into a row of bumpy rock. He was now higher and within reach, and I tried to climb, but he flashed out a hand and took a solid grip of my pants, gripping them at the back of my thigh, pinching my skin. "The stones are gonna split your skull," he said, and began yanking. The force was strong as he pulled away, my boots slipping. It made my hands jerk on the rock. He kept pulling and jerking at my leg, like my leg was an annoying strong-rooted weed he was trying to unearth. My hands and fingers kept slipping, and I kept regripping. The bones in my fingers felt like they were burning, my hands set afire. He has me, I thought. Only moments before my hands slip. I looked down at the man, his face red and twisted with rage, and his arm jerking back and forth. He released his grip for a moment, only to drive his knuckles into the back of my leg, thumping my kneecap into the stone. I cried out, "Ah," as it felt like a hammer struck my knee, and as my forehead rested upon the rock, tears welled in my eyes. I did not want my life to end. I wanted to live. To see Tantan and Katie. "Get off my island," Galleon called and grabbed my pants again, pulling. Amidst all the wrenching and the imminent threat of death, I had lost control of my thoughts. But the thought of seeing my friends again brought me a touch of clarity. The only chance I had to survive was to remove Galleon from the stone. I focused on him, foreseeing a slim chance to kick him in the head if he'd only release my pants once more. "You couldn't pull down an apple from a tree," I said. He grimaced, as if believing this was true. "I'll smash that knee," he cried, and released my pants. "Now." Galleon pulled his arm back to throw a knuckle-piercing punch, and I slipped my boot from the stone and sized up his large forehead. "I'm gonna kick you so hard 3 generations of your ancestors' bones are gonna rattle in their graves." I let fly for his head. Galleon was a man of war, and not so easily fooled or defeated. He swiveled back fast and wrapped his arm around my calf, securing it around the curve behind my knee. He had me, like jabbing a barbed hook through the gills of a fish. He looked into my eyes with a grin that could have thrown more dirt over a grave than 100 shovels. "You're going down," he said. He was right. I was. Below, the beast opened its sickening pinkish mouth, swiveling its tentacles as if testing the air for flavor. The monster would suck me off the rocks, then Galleon would make the slow climb to the surface and hunt down my friends. Only one ridiculous move remained. I looked at my hands, wriggling my fingers, threatening to let go, then looked at Galleon. "We're both going down." His eyes widened. "Don't do it. You won't save yourself." My own salvation had always been my aim. Not anymore. "I'll save my family." I pushed off the rock, but out toward the source blade pierced into the stone. I fell and wrapped both hands around it. With Galleon's weight on it coupled with mine, I jerked it right out of its hole, and I kicked back into Galleon's body, and we both tumbled. The great stone wall flashed by as we fought over the source dagger, no bigger than a source rod. Galleon pried it from my hands. The bedrock of stone approached. With yards left, I managed to kick into the rock in an attempt to save myself and leave Galleon to splat. But as we were locked in battle, we both projected out over the stone. We spanked into the water. Beneath the surface we broke apart, both sensing the urgency of the grotesque danger that lurked. We quickly kicked up through our bubbles and surfaced amongst the chop. 2 tentacles rose like shark's fins breaching the surface. Galleon swung an arm over to swim, but a fat tentacle wrapped around his shoulder. His eyes nearly burst in their sockets, and his tonsils nearly leapt from his throat as he screamed out, "A-A-A-A-A-R-R-R-H-H-H-H," loud enough to nearly part the ocean. Before I could take a stroke toward the island, a tentacle slipped around my shoulder. It was slimy and oozy and protruded with muscle, pure strength. Galleon panicked, waving his arms wildly as if drowning, slapping the energy blade around uselessly. If he wasn't going to use it well, I was. I quickly snatched the blade from his grasp and sliced the tip of the tentacle off my shoulder. It lurched back, spilling dark purple blood. The gigantic, round eye of the creature stared at me. Hungry. I kicked back in the water, inching away as it slid another tentacle around Galleon's neck. Then Galleon caught my left hand, gripping me tight. "Save me," he cried. Before it was possible to break away, the tentacle creeped over his hand and mine, clasping us together by my fingers. I tried to jerk my hand free, but even with my little finger gone, its hold was too tense, and the hideous whale squeezed down so tight it felt as if it would crush my bones. I raised the energy dagger to slash the tentacle, but on my downward swing another whale arm wrapped around my elbow, stifling my reach. I tried to cut it, but could only reach my hand, agonizing inches from cutting the tentacle. In mere moments the vile sea creature would pull my arms out wide and drag me away. I glanced at my hand and Galleon's, and the tentacle secured around my fingers. Aboard the Welkin, I thought my fingers were destined to save me. It turns out they were. Straining for reach, I brought the blade toward my hand and sliced off my remaining 3 fingers. Galleon's hand slipped away, holding my fingers. The tentacle slipped away with him. I reached across and took the dagger with my fingerless hand, clamping it with my thumb, then quickly sliced the tentacle around my elbow. It fell off and I dropped the dagger, turned and swam for the rocky shore, experiencing the strange sensation of pawing through water with one fingerless hand. I quickly grabbed hold of the stone, the island, and a rushing surge of freedom rushed through my body. With difficulty I pulled myself up, noticing the energy of the blade had again cauterized my severed fingers. Horrific screams echoed off the water and stones, and I looked back to see the monster wrap Galleon in its tentacles and hold the man aloft. He wriggled wildly just above the water. The monster angled Galleon's feet toward its mouth. It spread its pink lips and opened its jaws to reveal the dark, purplish hole sprouting rows of bladed teeth. With a giant gulp it swallowed Galleon's legs up to the knee. Another quick lip-wriggling suck that made a sickening glurp had him swallowed to the belly. Galleon caught eyes with me, face twisted in horror. "Arr!" he screamed out a wobbling howl. Blood spilled from his mouth as the hideous creature gnawed on his stomach. Then with a swift jerk, the great fish pulled back, diving into the deep. It took Galleon, only leaving a trail of bubbles. I remained in shock for a moment, clinging to stone. Although I felt safe, there was the horrible thought of that thing returning. I began to climb the rock, slowly dragging myself higher. It was hard climbing with my strength fading and only one hand having a full set of fingers, and I couldn't have made it more than 10 yards up when all my muscles convulsed and revolted against movement. I couldn't climb anymore. I clung on. Then came the sound of flapping wings, and from around the side of the island, hugging against the stone, was Tantan clutching the feet of a bird, and another flying with him. The white feathers glimmered silver in the sun, and they swooped down. They slapped into the stone beside me, clinging to rock, the free bird flapping its wings. It gawked at me with its dark eyes, as if it were saying, "I am not going to enjoy your body weight dangling upon my legs, but grab a hold anyway." Then, leaning slowly forward, I stretched out my hand with the fingers, exhausted and battered, and snagged a hold of its claws. "Your hand," Tantan said. It didn't matter. "Katie?" I said to Tantan. "Safe," Tantan said, and then he asked, "Galleon?" I nodded toward the swirling water. "Gone." We kicked off the rock and took flight, holding on to the legs of the pelicans. The birds flew out over the sea, and then took us higher along the wall of stone until we crested the top of the island. They flew past the grand white stone house, and I marveled that all this turmoil was over, and they took us low into the thick of the trees, and the birds kept a fast pace, and then lowered into one big, simultaneous awkward landing and drop-off. Tantan and I went tumbling and flailing across the forest bed to where we flattened out on the grass. We rolled over and faced each other. Never had grass felt so reassuring. We barely caught breath when Katie called, "Evita," from way back by the stones, Kiyoshi now standing and wrapping her arms around her. Katie broke free and came running. As we waited for her, Tantan reached out and tenderly traced a finger along my hand with the severed fingers. "We will have new mechanical fingers made." The mess of blonde hair drifted over his hazel eyes that were no longer hazy from the neutralizer disc I initially shot him with, but they held love and affection. Affection for me, the unwanted daughter of a no-good drunk farmer in the small town of Calexico. Evita Sanchez. "Can those glorified ducks fly us all to the mainland?" I said. "Sure," Tantan said, and then gazed at me. "You signed away the Source Empire. Ownership will go to the townships of Stygian and Sveta. You came so close to having just one rod, then all of them. Now nothing." I rubbed his arm with my finger-filled hand. "Oh, but I have your two skinny rod-like arms." Kiyoshi returned to her village and joined her aunts and uncles, although the use of her left arm was limited, as it remained heavily scarred and nerve-damaged from the purple stinging blob. The next night they honored Salehi with a ceremony of setting small balloons of fire into the night sky. But what would honor him more is what he helped accomplish, keeping the empire away from Galleon and having the power dispersed freely. Tantan, Katie and I quickly decided to settle in the area, and in the morning we went for a stroll to enjoy the warmth of the bay. Tantan said we'd build our stone cabin here, amongst a spring of palms and ocean grove trees just off the ocean. A path lined by tropical trees and mangroves took us toward the water, a small trail that weaved through winding lanes overhung with coconut palms and mangroves. After a few minutes, the overgrown green path parted onto the beautiful bay, a long sweep of a golden sand beach accompanied by a scatter of great stones with the tropical palms lining the shore, along with a shoreline bay of trees, pure green as ripe apples and stretching out to eternity. Katie broke onto the bay and took off running, her hair bouncing as if it reflected her joy. The peaceful morning was breathtaking, with a few sailboats drifting by and king pelicans fishing for breakfast along the sandy shores. It would be a tranquil place for Katie to experience her childhood, to grow into a young woman. I had spent my youth fighting the mob, not literally at first, mainly through not wanting my character to be affected, changed. I guess it did change me though. How could it not? I grew hard and callous and greedy and cared only for myself, a woman of pure ice. But how Tantan and Katie helped melt that bitter cold, freeing the woman beneath. From my battered youth, I always longed to be elsewhere, a grandiose place with the rich and opulent, but now settling into the life of a farm girl seemed entirely grander than anything imaginable. I had walked on beaches before, spent many trips with the mafia to wealthy hotels bordering on the Mexican sands, but never had I experienced a coastline so gorgeous. Water was rolling over in waves, foam-topped and white, a floor of squeaky soft sand swirled around the large rocks fringed by the palms and tropical plants. Although it was stunning, it wasn't my favorite ever beach because of the beauty, no, not nearly. It was the best ever because of my two companions. A young girl who now saw me as her mother, and a man who I have grown to love, respect, and adore. And with the sun rising over the vast blue, glittering gold off the water, and a warm breeze curling my hair, it was better than any of my hopes of opulence. Our own oasis, Tanton said, squeezing my hand as we strolled. More than any half-Mexican girl could ever dream, I said. Tanton drew a warm smile, as if it was ignited by the sun flickering its rays over the bay. Every Mexican is a Sanchez, Tanton said, supporting the biggest grin imaginable over his initial words to me. Then he gently raised my hand that still had its fingers and said, maybe we should change that last name to Smith, and he kissed my ring finger. I leaned into the skinny-armed young man intently and romantically, and planted a kiss on his lips. Then I rubbed his hair into a bigger mess and said, every American is a Smith.